Hello guys, welcome to Phoenix What If. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto was a Vizard captain and fell in love with Mashiro Kuna? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Crimson Whirlwind and the Emerald Flash. The air in the training grounds of the 9th Division was still, heavy with the pre-dawn chill that clung to the stone and sand of the Seraite. It was a silence born of discipline, a quiet understood by every soul reaper who called this place home. Yet, to Captain Naruto Uzumaki, it was simply quiet. He stood alone in the center of the vast, raked sand courtyard, the deep black of his captain's howry a stark contrast to the pale gray ground. His eyes, a blue so deep they seemed to drink the light, were closed. He wasn't meditating, not in the traditional sense. He was listening to the thrum of souls within the barracks, the distant, rhythmic clang of the 11th Division's morning spars, and the faintest, ever-present whisper in the back of his own mind. A hungry, ancient thing that tasted of shadow and ozone. His Zanpakuto, Kyubi, was sealed, its hilt wrapped in simple white cloth, resting against his hip. It didn't hum or vibrate with eagerness like some blades. It was a part of him, as silent and watchful as he was. His spiritual pressure, his Ryutsu, was a placid ocean. Vast, immeasurably deep, but calm on the surface. It was a control honed over decades. A necessity born from the storm that raged within him. Most captains allowed their power to radiate, a silent proclamation of their station. Naruto preferred to keep his coiled, a hidden beast leashed and waiting. It made others underestimate him, at least for a moment, and a moment was all he ever needed. A flash of movement, silent as a falling leaf, announced the arrival of his lieutenant, Hisagi Shuhei. The man materialized 10 paces away, his own Ryutsu a respectful, controlled signal. He didn't speak immediately, simply waited. That was the way of the 9th under Naruto. Words were used when necessary. Action spoke with greater clarity. "Captain," Hisagi finally said, his voice a low baritone. "The reports from the Rukongai District 64 have been compiled. Resid. UAL energy signatures are inconsistent with standard hollow activity." Naruto opened his eyes. The world snapped into sharp focus. Inconsistent how? They're chaotic, but also patterned. Like static trying to form a word. Forensics is having trouble classifying it. They also found traces of what they believed to be Garganta residue, but no Garganta was ever observed opening. Hisagi's brow was furrowed. He was a capable, serious man. And uncertainty did not sit well with him. A stealth hollow, Naruto mused, his gaze drifting toward the distant walls of the Seraite. Or something trying to mimic one. He turned his head slightly, the simple movement carrying a weight that made Hisagi stand a little straighter. "Keep the patrols vigilant. Double the wards around the district. I don't like puzzles without pieces." "Yes, sir." Quote. Before another word could be spoken, the world screamed. A piercing, soul-shaking wail echoed across the Seraite, a sound that bypassed the ears and vibrated directly in the bones. The emergency summons. Not the chime for a standard incursion, but the continuous, high-pitched alarm reserved for a dire threat. Multiple threats. Large ones. Naruto's placid ocean of Ryutsu churned. Just for a second, a flicker of something vast and terrible stirred in its depths, turning the air cold. He didn't move, but the very atmosphere around him seemed to tighten. Hisagi flinched, a bead of sweat tracing its way down his temple. He'd served under Naruto for years and still wasn't used to that feeling, the sensation of standing next to a dormant volcano that had just twitched in its sleep. Location. Naruto's voice was unchanged, calm and cutting. "Scouts are reporting multiple high-capacity signatures in District 32, the Emerald Forest," Hisagi reported. His professionalism overriding his unease. "Dozens of Jillians, and sensors are struggling to get a lock, but they indicate at least 3 signatures on par with an Ijuka's. The 9th will mobilize," Naruto stated. It wasn't a suggestion. He took a single step, and the world blurred. He was gone. A flicker of black and orange in a shunpo so fast it left no trace, no whisper of displaced air. Hisagi exhaled, the tension leaving his shoulders in a rush. He turned to the barracks, his voice a roar that carried the authority of his captain. "9th Division, to me. We're moving out." The Emerald Forest was chaos. The name was a misnomer. The district was a sprawling, forgotten part of the Rukongai where nature had reclaimed forgotten shacks and roads, creating a labyrinth of towering sea and trees with leaves the color of jade. Now, it was a war zone. The towering, mindless forms of Jillians tore through the canopy, their seros scoring black, smoldering lines across the landscape. So, Reapers from the 5th and 10th divisions were already engaged, flashes of Kido and steel arcing through the green gloom. But the real fight was happening in the heart of the district, where 3 monstrous creatures, each distinct and terrifying, held the line. They weren't standard Ejukas. One was a hulking, 6-legged beast of chitin and bone, spitting corrosive acid. Another was a lithe, serpentine horror that moved with impossible speed, its scales shimmering like oil on water. The third was a nightmarish thing of eyes and tentacles, its mere presence seeming to warp the space around it. A blur of green light shot through the air, impossibly fast, and slammed into the side of the serpentine hollow's head with a crack like thunder. The creature hissed, shaking its massive skull, and a figure landed lightly on a branch 50 feet away, crouched like a predator. Mashiro dropped. She shouted to no one in particular, a wide, manic grin splitting her face. She wore the standard Shinigami Shihakusho, but over it was a sleeveless white jacket, and on her hands and feet were thick, reinforced bracers and greaves. A pair of goofy, bug-eyed goggles were pushed up on her short, lime-green hair. This was Mashiro Kuna, lieutenant of the 9th Division. No, wait, she used to be. Now she was a Vizard, reinstated, and proudly serving as Lieutenant under Captain Kensai Mugaruma again. Details. Mashiro, you idiot, stick to the plan. Kensai's voice barked from below. He stood his ground, his Zanpakuto, Tachika's, released in its Shikai form, a brutal combat knife. We're supposed to be containing it, not playing with it. But Kenny, it's so fast. It's fun, she chirped back, bouncing on the balls of her feet. Her Ryutsu was a firecracker, wild, joyful, and utterly unpredictable. She launched herself forward again, becoming a living projectile of pure, destructive force. Her fighting style was all instinct and exhilaration, a whirlwind of devastating kicks that she announced with childish glee. Mashiro's super kick. The serpentine hollow was indeed fast, but Mashiro was faster. She was a flicker of motion, a green comet that seemed to be everywhere at once. She wasn't using shunpo in the traditional sense, she was simply moving, propelled by the sheer, unadulterated energy that seemed to pour from her. She landed another kick, this one to the creature's underbelly. That sent it reeling back with a pained shriek. It was then that the third Ejukas, the one of eyes and tentacles, made its move. Its main body remained stationary, but dozens of its tentacles lashed out, not at Mashiro, but at the ground around her. They didn't strike. They phased through the earth and trees, only to erupt again from different angles. It was a disorienting, three-dimensional attack that defied logic. Mashiro giggled, flipping and twisting through the air, dodging the grasping limbs with acrobatic grace. Ooh, wiggly, you're wiggly, Mr. Tentacles. Mashiro, get back here. Kensai roared, as he and his men were forced to deal with the acid-spitting beast. He knew that for all her power and speed, Mashiro's weakness was her complete lack of strategy. She fought with the brilliant, beautiful mindlessness of a hurricane. A tentacle, moving faster than the others, phased through a massive tree trunk directly behind her. Mashiro, mid-air and off balance from a kick, had no way to dodge. Her eyes widened, her playful grin momentarily vanishing. The world went silent. A figure appeared between Mashiro and the tentacle. Just appeared. One moment, empty air. The next, a man in a captain's howry. The kanji for 9, stark on its back. His hair was the color of sun-bleached gold, and his hand was held out, palm open. The tentacle, a limb that could shatter granite, slammed into his palm and stopped dead. It didn't even tremble. Naruto Uzumaki hadn't even looked behind him. His blue eyes were fixed on the multi-eyed Ejukas, a cold, analytical light within them. With a casual flick of his wrist, he didn't just push the tentacle back, he tore it from its socket, the appendage disintegrating into black dust before it could even fall. Lieutenant Kuna, he said, his voice a low, calm baritone that cut through the cacophony of battle. He still hadn't turned to look at her. Your position is compromised. Fall back and support Captain Mugaruma. Mashiro landed on a branch, her feet making no sound. Her mouth was slightly agape, her usual manic energy momentarily stunned into silence. She stared at the back of the blonde-haired captain. The sheer, F.O.R.T-less finality of his action had short-circuited her brain. He hadn't flexed. He hadn't released a surge of power. He had simply negated the attack. The level of control, the density of spiritual pressure required to do that so casually, was staggering. "Who are you?" she breathed, the question soft, filled with a sudden, intense curiosity. Naruto finally glanced over his shoulder. His expression was neutral, impassive. But his eyes were like twin blue flames. They swept over her for a fraction of a second, taking in the green hair, the Vizard Ryutsu she barely bothered to contain, and the bewildered look on her face. A flicker of something unreadable passed through his gaze. Recognition. Annoyance. It was gone before she could decipher it. "I'm your captain," he stated simply, as if I.T. were the most obvious fact in the world. He then turned his full attention back to the Ajukas. He drew Kyubi. The blade slid from its sheath with a sound like a sigh. It was a simple katana, perfectly balanced, unadorned. It needed no embellishment. The tentacled hollow seemed to recognize the shift in threat. All of its dozens of eyes swiveled to focus on Naruto. It let out a psychic screech. That made the lesser soul reapers in the area clutch their heads in pain. Naruto didn't even blink. "Hisagi," he said, his voice still calm, but now it carried across the battlefield. "Take the 5th and 10th Division members. Eradicate the Jillians. Captain Mugaruma, your Vizard squad is best equipped to handle the acid spitter. Take it down. The serpentine one is fast, but it's all instinct. Captain Hitsugaya, your ice should be sufficient to neutralize its mobility." The orders were delivered without flourish, a cascade of simple, undeniable logic. They weren't requests. They were statements of fact. Tactical certainties laid bare. On the ground, a young, white-haired captain gritted his teeth. "Don't order me around, Uzumaki." Toshiro Hitsugaya snapped, but he was already signaling his lieutenant, Rangaku Matsumoto. A silent command to execute the exact strategy Naruto had just outlined. Kensai grunted in affirmation, his gaze locking on his own target. "What about that one, Captain?" Hisagi's voice came from nearby. His own Shikai, Kazushini, now released and whirling in his hands. He gestured toward the tentacled beast. "That one," Naruto said, taking a slow step forward, "is mine." The hollow seemed to understand. It recoiled, pulling all of its tentacles back as if gathering strength. The very air around it began to shimmer and distort. Mashiro, still perched on her branch, found she couldn't look away. She had seen powerful captains fight before. She'd seen head Captain Yamamoto's Inferno, Byakuya's storm of petals, Kenpachi's pure, unadulterated carnage. This was different. This wasn't a release of power. It was a compression of it. The air around Naruto grew heavy, dense. The light seemed to bend slightly around his form. He raised his blade, holding it in a simple, two-handed grip. "You intrude upon a place you do not belong," he said, his voice low, directed at the monster. "You disrupt an order you do not understand." The Ajukas shrieked and unleashed its power. It wasn't a Sero. The space between it and Naruto simply broke. Reality fractured like glass, a wave of spatial distortion rushing toward the captain, intending to tear him apart on a fundamental level. Naruto's eyes narrowed. For a single, terrifying heartbeat, the blue of his irises was swallowed by black, and a slit, predatory pupil of crimson flared into existence. A wave of Ryutsu, so dense and sharp it felt like it had physical edges, erupted from him. It wasn't the warm pressure of a soul reaper. It was cold, predatory, and utterly alien. It was the power of a hollow, but it was controlled. Shaped by a will of iron. "Howl, Kyubi," he whispered. His Zanpakuto didn't transform in a flash of light. It was consumed. A torrent of blood red and black energy erupted from Naruto, swirling around him like a vortex. It wasn't the chaotic energy of a hollow. It was shaped, focused, forming 9 distinct spectral tails of pure Ryutsu that lashed and writhed behind him. His blade elongated, becoming a massive, single-edged cleaver of obsidian black, with a jagged, tooth-like edge. The guard transformed into a stylized fox head, its fanged mouth open in a silent snarl. He swung. He didn't use a technique name. He didn't shout. He simply brought the massive blade down in a clean, vertical arc. The cleaver didn't release a wave of energy. It cut the attack itself. The wave of spatial distortion was bisected, parting around him like water around a stone. The cut did not stop there. It traveled through the air, a razor-thin line of absolute nothingness that crossed T. He distanced to the Ajukas in an instant. The tentacled beast froze. All of its eyes widened. A thin, perfectly straight red line appeared down the center of its body. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, it slid apart, its two halves falling away from each other, disintegrating into ash before they even hit the ground. The clearing fell silent once more, the only sounds the distant clashes of the other battles. Naruto stood over the dissipating remains of the monster, his Shikai still active. The 9 spectral tails of energy swirled around him, a corona of terrible, beautiful power. The hollow part of his Ryutsu receded, pulled back under his suffocating control, leaving only the deep, calm ocean of his Soul Reaper energy. His eyes were blue again. Mashiro finally let out the breath she was holding. It came out as a quiet, wow. That was it. That was the only word she could find. She had seen power, but this was precision. It was the difference between a sledgehammer and a scalpel. If the scalpel could cleave a mountain in half, he hadn't just killed the hollow, he had unmade it with contemptuous ease. He let his Shikai dissolve, the massive cleaver shrinking back into a simple katana, which he sheathed with a quiet click. He turned, his gaze sweeping the battlefield. The other 2 Ajukas, deprived of their linchpin, were already being overwhelmed. The Jillians were fouling in droves to Hisagi's relentless assault. The battle was won. His eyes found Mashiro again. This time, he held her gaze. The intensity in them was gone, replaced by a quiet, assessing calm. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod, an acknowledgement of her role in the initial engagement. Then, with another flicker of shunpo, he was gone, reappearing on the ground near Kensai. Mashiro felt a strange, unfamiliar flutter in her chest. It wasn't the adrenaline of a good fight. It was something else, something interesting. She looked down at her hands. They were trembling slightly. "Hey, Kenny," she shouted, zipping through the air to land beside her captain, who was wiping hollow blood from his knife. Who was that? The foxy-haired captain. Is he new? Kensai grunted, not looking up. That's Naruto Uzumaki, captain of the 9th. And no, he's not new. He's been here longer than you think. The 9th. But, you're the 9th. I mean, you were. Now you're the 6th. No, you're the 9th again, aren't you? It's so confusing, she whined, poking his shoulder. I'm captain of the 5th division, Mashiro. We've been over this, Kensai sighed, the picture of long-suffering patience. Uzumaki took over the 9th after I left. He's one of them. Mashiro tilted her head. One of who? The cool guys. He's definitely a cool guy. Did you see that? It was like swoosh, and then blam, and the tentacle guy was just gone. She made wild gestures with her hands, trying to replicate the impossibly clean cut. One of us, you airhead, Kensai said, finally looking at her. His expression was serious. He's a Vizard. Mashiro's eyes widened, her bug-eyed goggles slipping down her nose. A Vizard. A captain. A Vizard who had been a captain for decades, by the sound of it. Not an outcast, not a pariah hiding in the world of the living, but an integral part of the Gote 13. She had, of course, heard whispers. A powerful soul from outside the cycle of reincarnation, one who had walked into He Soul Society with his power already formed. One who had mastered the beast within him long before he'd ever earned his Haori. But hearing stories was one thing. Seeing it was another. Seeing him. The way he moved. The way he commanded. The way all that terrifying, cold power was held behind those calm, blue eyes. A thrill, different from the joy of battle, ran through her. He was a puzzle. A quiet, powerful, foxy-haired puzzle. And Mashiro Kuna loved puzzles. Naruto Uzumaki, she whispered to herself, testing the name on her tongue. It felt solid, important. She grinned, a wide, mischievous expression that was all her own. I'm gonna find out all about him. The 1st Division Barracks, the seat of power for the entire Gote 13, was a place of oppressive silence. The captain commander, Genryusai Shigekuni Yamamoto, sat on the raised platform, his ancient eyes closed, his gnarled hands resting on his cane. The remaining captains were assembled before him, standing in 2 neat lines. The meeting had been called the moment the battle was concluded. The incursion was unusual. Captain Mayuri Kuretsuchi of the 12th Division hissed, his voice a grotesque synthesis of glee and academic curiosity. The subjects displayed abilities far beyond their classification. Spatial distortion, advanced corrosive compounds, coordinated pack tactics between different classes of Manos. It's fascinating. My labs will be busy for weeks analyzing the data we collected. Fascinating is not the word I would use, Captain Soifin of the 2nd Division countered, her voice sharp as glass. It was a breach, a coordinated, intelligent breach. Their point of entry left no discernible trace. This implies a level of stealth and tactical planning we have not seen since. She trailed off, but everyone knew the name she left unsaid, Aizen. The air in the room grew colder. There is no evidence to suggest this is related to Sosuke Aizen, Captain Shunsui Kyoraku said, his lazy drawl a stark contrast to Soifin's intensity. He tipped his straw hat, a shadow falling over his face. This feels different, less like a chess master moving his pieces and more like a pack of wolves testing the fence. Yamamoto's eyes finally opened, ancient fire flickering within them. Captain Uzumaki, he rumbled, his voice like the grinding of tectonic plates. You faced the lead entity. Your assessment. All eyes turned to Naruto, who stood silently at the end of the line. He hadn't spoken a word since the meeting began. He met the head captain's gaze without flinching. It was strong, Naruto said, his voice even. But it was also hollow. Mayuri scoffed. A truly groundbreaking observation, Captain Uzumaki. A hollow was, in fact, hollow. Your intellect astounds. Naruto ignored him. I don't mean its nature. I mean its core. When I cut it, I felt its source. There was power, immense and chaotic, but there was no will behind it. No driving ambition, no hunger, no despair. It was a weapon, wielded by another. An empty vessel filled with malice that was not its own. The room fell silent. This was a new, disturbing thought. Hollows were driven by primal instinct. The idea of one being a mere puppet was deeply unsettling. The energy signature, Naruto continued, the one Hisagi reported from the earlier incidents in District 64. I felt it again, clinging to that Ijuka's. A faint echo. It's not hollow. It's not Soul Reaper. It's something else. Something old. Can you track it? Yamamoto asked. Naruto shook his head. It's too faint. A ghost of a scent. But wherever it's coming from, this was a test. They wanted to see how we would respond. How our captains would fight. They collected data today, just as we did. His words hung in the air, a chilling premonition. The Gote 13 had won the battle. But they had also, perhaps, revealed their hand. The meeting was dismissed shortly after, with orders for heightened security and deeper investigation. The captains filed out, some intense discussion. Others lost in their own thoughts. As Naruto stepped out into the harsh midday sun, a shadow fell over him. That was quite a show back there, Naruto-kun, Shunsui said, appearing beside him. A friendly smile on his face that didn't quite reach his eyes. Jashiro Yukitaki, his oldest friend and the captain of the 13th Division, stood with him, offering a gentler, more genuine smile. It was a necessary expenditure of energy, Naruto replied, his tone formal. Oh, I'm not talking about the hollow, Shunsui chuckled, leaning in conspiratorially. I'm talking about your fan club. You seem to have acquired a rather energetic new admirer. Lieutenant Kuna, wasn't it? Naruto's expression didn't change, but Yukitaki saw the barest flicker in his eyes. She is an effective combatant, if undisciplined. She's a force of nature, Yukitaki corrected warmly. She reminds me of a typhoon, all wind and joyous destruction. It's good to have her and the others back. Indeed, Shunsui agreed, and she couldn't take her eyes off you. It's not every day someone manages to render Mashiro-chan speechless. Naruto started walking, his pace measured. I'm sure her attention will be focused elsewhere by tomorrow. Her kind are not known for their focus. Her kind. Shunsui raised an eyebrow. You mean Vizards? Last I checked, Naruto-kun, that's your kind, too. Naruto stopped. He didn't turn, but his shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly. I am a captain of the Gote 13. That is all I am. The words were flat, absolute. It was the wall he built around himself, the one no one, not even his oldest acquaintances in the Soul Society, had ever managed to breach. Shunsui's smile faded slightly. He knew Naruto's history, or as much as anyone knew. Found as a boy in the Rukongai, already possessing a sealed Zanpakuto and an inner hollow so perfectly merged it was a part of his very soul. He had ascended the ranks with terrifying speed, a prodigy of immense power and even greater control. He had never faltered, never lost his grip, never allowed the beast within to rule him. But that control came at a cost. It created a distance, a chasm between him and the rest of the world. Of course, Captain, Shunsui said, his tone shifting back to something more respectful. Forgive my forwardness. Naruto gave a slight nod and continued walking, his black haori billowing behind him. A solitary figure against the stark white walls of the Seraite. Later that evening, the moon hung high and full in the sky, a silver disk in a sea of ink. Naruto sat on the Ingawa of his private quarters, overlooking a small, meticulously kept garden. The air was cool, and the only sound was the gentle trickle of water in a shishi adoshi. He had long since dismissed his duties for the day. This was his time. He held a small, featureless wooden mask in his hands. It wasn't his hollow mask. It was just a piece of wood, something he had carved himself years ago. He ran his thumb over the smooth, unpainted surface. He was thinking about the battle. Not the hollow, not the strange energy, but the flash of green. The wild, unrestrained joy of movement. Mashiro Kuna. He had been aware of her, of course. He knew of all the Vizards, the ones Aizen had exiled. He had felt a distant kinship with them, but also a fundamental difference. They fought their hollows. They struggled for dominance. His was him. It was a part of his soul, inseparable, intertwined. The hungry whisper in his mind was no more alien to him than his own heartbeat. To fight it would be to fight himself. So he had mastered it. He had leashed the raging fox, made its power his own, and in doing so, had wrapped himself in a shroud of absolute control. And then he saw her. She didn't control her hollow nature. She reveled in it. She let its wild energy fuel her, turning her into a living tempest of joyous power. There was no struggle, no grim determination. Just freedom. A freedom he had never allowed himself to even consider. It was reckless. It was inefficient. It was dangerous. And it was utterly, inexplicably captivating. He remembered the look in her eyes when he had intervened. Surprise, then awe, and then a burning, intense curiosity. It was a look that saw past the captain's haori, past the stoic facade. It was a look that seemed to see the storm he kept locked away, and instead of fear, it had looked, intrigued. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched Naruto's lips, a rare thing that would have shocked any member of his division. He placed the wooden mask beside him and looked up at the moon. The quiet felt different tonight. Not empty, but expectant. Across the Seraite, in the barracks of the 5th Division, the atmosphere was anything but quiet. And then his sword got all big and black and spiky. And it had 9 giant ghost tails made of fire, and he just went swoosh. Mashiro was demonstrating for the 3rd time, using a rolled-up poster as a makeshift Zanpakuto. Oh, and nearly taking out a sliding paper door. The big ugly tentacle guy just fell apart like a sandcastle. It was the coolest thing I've ever seen. Even cooler than my Mashiro super duper flying kick. Kensai sat at his desk, rubbing his temples with a deep, weary sigh. He had a mountain of paperwork to deal with, and his lieutenant was a living, breathing distraction. His name is Naruto Uzumaki, Kensai said, not looking up from his reports. He's the captain of the 9th. He's a Vizard, like us. And yes, he's powerful. Now can you please sit down? You're giving me a headache. But Kenny. Mashiro bounced over to his desk, planting her hands on it and leaning in close, her face alight with energy. What's his deal? Is he nice? Does he like to fight? What's his favorite food? Does he think my kicks are cool? I bet he thinks my kicks are cool. He just didn't say it 'cause he's the shy type. I don't know, Mashiro. He keeps to himself, Kensai grumbled. He's not exactly the type to hang around for idle chatter. He's all business. Now, about these requisitions. All business. Mashiro pouted, her lower lip jutting out. That's no fun. A guy that's strong has to have some fun, right? We should go spar with him. Yeah, let's go challenge him. Me and you against him. Absolutely not, Kensai said flatly. We are not going to bother the captain who just single-handedly killed a SP. Actually distorting Ajukas because you're bored. End of discussion. Mashiro deflated, slumping into a chair. She kicked her feet against the floor rhythmically, a frown on her face. Boring. Everything was so boring after a good fight. But the memory of the blonde captain, of his impossible power and his quiet, intense eyes, was anything but boring. It was a spark, a bright, fascinating light in the disciplined, often tedious world of the Gote 13. Her frown slowly transformed back into a grin, sly and determined. Kensai was right, she couldn't just go challenge him. That was too simple. This required a better plan. A Mashiro plan. It would be fun, it would be chaotic, and it would probably involve a lot of kicking. Naruto Uzumaki, she said softly, the name now familiar, exciting. The whirlwind fox, she liked the sound of that. It fit, the quiet stillness, and the devastating storm hidden just beneath the surface. Okay, Foxy Captain, she giggled to herself. Let's see what makes you whirl. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. Echoes in the static and an unscheduled spar. The lingering scent of ozone and something akin to burnt sugar hung heavy in the air of Rukongai District 64. It was a place where hope had long since packed its bags and left, leaving behind a collection of dilapidated shacks and winding, refuse-strewn alleys. Here, under a perpetually gray sky, the silence was not peaceful. It was the silence of absence, of things long dead and forgotten. For the second time in as many days, Naruto Uzumaki stood in the heart of the anomaly, his captain's Haori a stark slash of white against the grimy backdrop. Hisagi was a few paces behind him, his hand resting on the hilt of his Zanpakuto, his senses on high alert. The reports were accurate, Captain, Hisagi stated, his voice low. The residual energy is faint, almost gone. But it's wrong. Naruto didn't respond. His eyes were closed again, his posture deceptively relaxed. He wasn't just sensing with the refined spiritual awareness of a Shinigami. He was casting a different kind of net, one woven from the threads of the very thing he kept chained in the depths of his soul. He let a sliver of Kyuubi's consciousness seep out, not its power, but its perception. To a soul reaper, spiritual energy was a flow, a pressure, a presence. To a hollow, it was a meal. It had texture, flavor, a scent that spoke of its owner's nature. This allowed Naruto to perceive Ryutsu on a fundamentally different level. He could taste the echoes left on the air. The lingering energy of the soul reapers who had first investigated was plain, like clean water. The ambient spiritual residue of the Rukongai itself was a dull, earthy flavor of countless, powerless souls. But beneath it all, there was something else. The static. Hisagi had described it well. To Naruto's senses, it felt like grit in his teeth, a discordant hum at the edge of hearing. It was chaotic, yet patterned, like a recording that had been shattered and glued back together in the wrong order. It felt ancient, not in the way head Captain Yamamoto was ancient, a living history of immense power. This was the ancient feeling of a tomb, of dust and decay and omething that had been sleeping for eons, only now beginning to stir. It wasn't just here, Naruto said, his voice quiet, almost a whisper. It passed through. This was just a waypoint. He opened his eyes, the deep blue of their irises seeming to absorb the gloom around them. He knelt, placing a hand on the grimy cobblestones. He pushed a thread of his own, unique Ryutsu, that perfect, unsettling blend of Shinigami and hollow, into the ground. He wasn't searching for a trail, he was listening for an echo. The static flared in his mind's eye. It wasn't just random noise. For a split second, the chaotic patterns coalesced, forming a symbol, a broken spiral, with a single, unblinking eye at its center. It was a brand, a marker left behind. It was a message, but not one he could read. It was a claim. This place has been noted. The image faded, the energy signature finally dissipating completely under his probing. He stood, brushing the dust from his hand. They're marking territory, he said. Who are they? Hisagi pressed, taking a step forward. Hollows don't mark territory like this. They conquer it, they feed on it. This is methodical. That's the question, Naruto replied, his gaze sweeping the empty alleyways. Whatever they are, they're intelligent, patient, and they have access to power we don't recognize. They're not from Hueco Mundo, not as we know it. He turned to leave, his mind already churning through the tactical implications. This was no mere hollow incursion. This was the prelude to something else entirely. Double the patrols on the outer districts. I want any and all energy fluctuations, no matter how minor, reported directly to me. Pull the 12th Division in. I want Mayuri's sensors recalibrated to search for this specific signature. Tell him it's a puzzle he hasn't solved yet. That should motivate him. Yes, Captain. As they began their shunpo back toward the Seraite, Naruto couldn't shake the image of the broken spiral. It was a cold, alien symbol, devoid of the familiar rage of a hollow or the ordered structure of Kido. It felt like the signature of a predator that hunted on a scale he had yet to comprehend. Boredom, to Mashiro Kuna, was a physical ailment. It started as a restlessness in her feet, a desperate need to kick something. Then it moved to her brain, making thoughts sluggish and turning the world a dull shade of gray. And for the past 3 hours, she had been subjected to the most potent form of boredom known to soul kind, paperwork. Captain Mugaruma had insisted she complete her own field reports from the battle. A task she found infinitely more grueling than fighting 3 Ajukas at once. Her report, so far, read, a bunch of bad guys showed up. I kicked them a lot. Mashiro kick, Mashiro drop. Then the foxy captain showed up and went swoosh with his big cool sword. He was super cool. We won. The end. She chewed on the end of her brush, tapping her foot with a frantic rhythm that was making a nearby squad member's eye twitch. Kensai had shot down her idea of challenging the 9th Division captain. He had called it reckless, unprofessional, and a really stupid way to get yourself assigned to latrine duty for a month. Mashiro pouted. Kenny was so sensible sometimes. It was his worst quality. But her mind kept replaying the fight. The effortless way Naruto had moved. The sheer, overwhelming density of his power when he stopped that tentacle. And the Shikai, the 9 spectral tails, the vicious black blade. It was wild. It was powerful. It was fun. And he was a Vizard, like her. That made them cousins. Buddies. Something. And buddies were supposed to spar, right? It was practically a rule. A brilliant, chaotic idea sparked in her mind, a plan so simple and direct it couldn't possibly fail. Kensai had told her not to go challenge Naruto. He hadn't said anything about just visiting. A friendly, unannounced visit. With a friendly, unannounced request to spar. It was a completely different thing. With a decisive nod, she slammed her brush down, splattering ink across the half-finished report. She shot to her feet, a wide, determined grin on her face. I'm going on break, she announced to the room. Before the twitching squad member could even formulate a question, she was gone. A flicker of green and a gust of wind that sent papers flying everywhere were the only evidence she had been there at all. The 9th Division barracks was the architectural equivalent of its captain. It was clean, orderly, and exuded an aura of quiet, disciplined readiness. There were loud-mouthed brutes like in the 11th, no scent of strange experiments like in the 12th. There was just calm. A calm Mashiro was about to gleefully shatter. She didn't use the main gate. That was for boring people. Instead, she took a running start from a block away, her ryutsu flaring around her feet, and launched herself into the air. She sailed over the outer wall in a graceful arc, iggling as the wind whipped through her green hair. She landed lightly in the center of the main training courtyard, the same one Naruto had stood in just yesterday morning. A group of 9th Division members, engaged in synchronized kata, froze mid-strike, their mouths agape. They had never seen anyone enter their compound in such a fashion. It was unseemly. Mashiro chirped, waving enthusiastically. As the foxy captain here, I wanna talk to him. A senior-looking officer, a man with a stern face and a perfectly trimmed beard, stepped forward. This is the headquarters of the 9th Division, he said, his voice stiff with disapproval. State your name and purpose, Lieutenant. And please, use the main entrance next time. I'm Mashiro Kuna, and my purpose is sparring, she declared, striking a dramatic pose. One leg kicked high in the air. I'm here to fight your captain. The stern-faced officer's eye began to twitch. The captain is not available for scheduled sparring sessions with lieutenants from other divisions. Please submit a formal request through the proper channels. Mashiro groaned. Channels. Requests. That sounds like paperwork. No thank you. She decided a more direct approach was needed. Ignoring the officer, she cupped her hands around her mouth and shouted at the top of her lungs, her voice echoing across the entire compound. Heeeeey. Foxy Captain. Naruto Uzumaki. Come out and FGHTMEEEE. The disciplined calm of the 9th Division shattered like glass. Windows slid open. Doors were flung aside. Dozens of Soul Reapers, from unseated officers to high-ranking squad members, poured into the surrounding walkways, their faces a mixture of confusion, outrage, and sheer disbelief. No one, in the entire history of Naruto Uzumaki's tenure as captain, had ever dared to do something so loud. Hisagi Shuhei appeared in a flicker of shunpo, landing between Mashiro and the growing crowd of his subordinates. His face was a thundercloud. Lieutenant Kuna, he said, his voice dangerously low. What is the meaning of this? You are disrupting the training of an entire division. I'm not disrupting, I'm inviting. She countered cheerfully. Your captain is super strong. And I'm super strong. We should fight to see who's stronger. It'll be fun. A festival of fists. And feet. Mostly feet, in my case. This is not the 11th Division, Hisagi growled, his patience worn thin. We do not resolve matters through pointless brawls. Now, I am ordering you to leave before I have you forcibly removed for trespassing and insubordination. Ooh, scary, Mashiro said. Though her grin didn't falter. She bounced on the balls of her feet, her energy practically vibrating off her. You can try, but I bet I'm faster than you. Just as Hisagi was out to release his shikai and end the ridiculous standoff, a voice, calm and clear, cut through the tension. That is enough, Hisagi. Naruto Uzumaki stepped out from the main building onto the Engawa overlooking the courtyard. He hadn't used shunpo. He simply walked out, his presence immediately commanding the attention of every person present. A wave of silence washed over the compound. The outraged squad members straightened up, their expressions shifting to ones of pure, unadulterated respect. Hisagi immediately lowered his hand from his sword and bowed his head slightly. Naruto's blue eyes fell on Mashiro. He took in her bouncing posture, her defiant grin, and the wild, joyful energy that rolled off her in waves. His expression was, as always, unreadable. He was neither angry nor amused. He simply observed. Lieutenant Kuna, he said, his voice carrying effortlessly across the courtyard. To what do I owe the disruption? Disruption. See, even he thinks I'm disrupting. Mashiro said to Hisagi, before turning her beaming face back to Naruto. I want to spar with you. A friendly match. Just to see what you've got. I decline, Naruto said flatly. Mashiro's grin faltered. What? Why not? Are you scared? A few of the 9th Division members gasped at the sheer audacity of the question. Naruto's expression did not change. A spar between us would serve no tactical purpose. It would be a waste of time and energy. Waste of energy. Fighting is never a waste of energy. It's how you know you're alive. Mashiro shot back, her passion flaring. She was getting frustrated. He was being just like Kenny. All boring and logical. Come on. Just one little fight, please. My answer is no, Lieutenant. Please see yourself out. He turned, preparing to go back inside. Mashiro was not about to be dismissed. In a burst of pure impulse, she launched herself forward. She didn't shout an attack name. She didn't release a wave of Ryutsu. She just moved, a green blur crossing the FTY feet between them in the blink of an eye. She spun in the air, her right leg scything toward his head in a kick that could have shattered the stone wall behind him. The 9th Division members cried out in alarm. Hisagi's eyes widened in shock. Naruto didn't turn. He didn't even seem to tense. Just as her foot was a hair's breadth from his temple, his left hand shot up, catching her ankle in a grip of iron. The force of the kick, a blow that carried the full, explosive power of a Vizard lieutenant, simply stopped. All of its kinetic energy was absorbed, negated, vanishing into his palm without him so much as shifting his footing. A puff of displaced air was the only evidence of the attack. The courtyard was dead silent. Mashiro hung there, suspended in midair, her leg caught in his grip. She stared at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. She had put everything into that kick, and he had stopped it. Casually, without even looking, slowly, Naruto turned his head, his blue eyes locking onto hers. The impassive mask was still there, but she could see something else in their depths now. A flicker of interest, a spark of something that might have been respect. Very fast, he said, "Hi." S voice, a low murmur only she could hear. "But you broadcast your intent. Your energy spikes a full half-second before you move." He gently lowered her leg, releasing her. She landed on the wooden planks of the Ingawa with a soft thud. Still staring at him, he looked out over the assembled members of his division, then back at Mashiro. He let out a sigh, a sound so faint it was barely audible. He seemed to come to a decision. Dealing with this force of nature logically was impossible. Therefore, a different approach was required. The most efficient one. "Fine," he said, his voice returning to its normal, commanding volume. "You wish to spar. I will grant your request." A wave of murmurs went through the crowd. Mashiro's face lit up, her earlier shock replaced by a triumphant, ear-to-ear grin. "But on my terms," Naruto continued, holding up a single finger. "We will not fight until one of us is exhausted or injured. That is inefficient. You will have one chance to land a clean, decisive blow. Not a graze, not a glancing hit. A solid strike." He paused, letting his words sink in. "If you succeed, I will concede defeat and you will have my respect. If I stop you, you will leave my div. Ishin in peace and file all future requests through the proper channels for no less than 6 months. Do we have an agreement?" Mashiro's grin widened. "A challenge. A real challenge. You're on, Foxy Captain. Get ready to be kicked into next week." Naruto simply nodded and, with a single, smooth step, dropped from the Ingawa into the center of the raked sand courtyard. He didn't draw his sword. He just stood there, his hands loose at his sides, waiting. Mashiro's heart hammered in her chest, a thrilling drumbeat of anticipation. This was it. This was what she wanted. She took a deep breath, her playful energy beginning to coalesce. Focusing into something sharp and dangerous. She bounced on her feet, loosening her limbs, her green ryutsu starting to flare around her like a vibrant aura. "Okay, here I come," she yelled, and then she was motion. She didn't charge in a straight line. She became a whirlwind, a chaotic storm of movement designed to disorient and overwhelm. She used shunpo in short, unpredictable bursts, appearing and disappearing all around Naruto, leaving afterimages in her wake. She was a dozen green flashes, a flurry of feints and probing jabs, testing his defenses, looking for an opening. Naruto didn't move from his spot. His head didn't even turn. His eyes were calm, his posture relaxed, yet he seemed to perceive everything. A kick aimed at his legs was met by a simple, precise shift of his weight, causing her foot to whistle through empty air. A sweeping hand strike aimed at his chest was deflected by the back of his wrist, the force of her blow redirected into the ground with a flick of his joint. He was a rock in the middle of her raging river, unmovable, unshakable. His defense was so minimal, so utterly efficient, it was almost insulting. Mashiro gritted her teeth, her frustration mounting, but it was a joyful frustration. He was incredible. He wasn't just reacting to her movements, he was anticipating them, reading the flow of her energy, the subtle tensing of her muscles, and moving a fraction of a second before she did. "Not bad," she yelled, flipping backward to create distance. "But I'm just getting warmed up." Mashiro's super kick. She rocketed forward, her entire body spinning like a top, building up incredible rotational momentum before she unleashed a vicious roundhouse kick aimed directly at his head. The air screamed as her foot cut through it. This time, Naruto moved. He ducked under the kick, the wind from its passage ruffling his blonde hair. As her leg passed over him, he rose up, his movements fluid and snake-like. His hand shot out, not to grab, but to tap. A single, precise finger jab to the back of her knee. It wasn't a powerful blow, but it struck a critical nerve point. Mashiro's leg buckled unexpectedly, her perfect form broken. She stumbled as she landed, her momentum completely disrupted. She recovered instantly, flipping away again, but she was breathing a little harder now. He hadn't landed a single blow. Yet he was completely controlling the fight. He was dismantling her offense piece by piece with almost zero effort. "Okay," she said, her voice losing some of its cheerfulness, replaced by a low, excited growl. "No more playing." She reached up and swiped her hand across her face. A surge of dense, powerful Ryutsu exploded from her, far more potent than before. Black markings with white NES spread across the left side of her face, and a grotesque, insect-like mask with large, goggle-like eyes and a strange antenna materialized over her face. Her voice, when she spoke again, was distorted, echoing with the dual tones of Shinigami and Hollow. "Let's see you handle this." The transformation sent a shockwave of fear through the watching 9th Division members. They knew their captain was a Vizard, but seeing the transformation on another, so wild and unrestrained, was terrifying. Naruto's eyes narrowed slightly. The impassive mask finally cracked, replaced by an expression of intense focus. He felt the shift in her power. It wasn't just stronger, it was more chaotic, more instinctual. It was the raw, untamed power of a Hollow, barely guided by a Shinigami's will. Mashiro didn't give him time to analyze. She vanished, not with Shunpo, but with Sonido. The high-pitched zip of the Hollow speed technique was the only sound she made. She appeared directly in front of him, her knee rocketing upward toward his chin. He leaned his head back, dodging by an inch, and she was gone again, reappearing behind him, her heel aimed at the back of his neck. The fight became a blur of green and black. Mashiro was a tempest, her attacks coming from all angles at once, each blow carrying the force to level buildings. And in the center of the storm stood Naruto. He was finally moving his feet, his Shunpo a seamless, flowing dance that kept him just outside the reach of her furious assault. His blocks were no longer simple deflections, he had to meet her force with his own, his palm. And the backs of his hands striking her greaves with sharp cracks of impact that sent tremors through the ground. She was pushing him. For the first time, someone was forcing him to move, to actually try. And deep within him, the ancient, hungry thing that was Kyuubi stirred, not with malice, but with a primal, forgotten excitement. Mashiro could feel it. She was hitting a wall, but for the first time, she felt the wall begin to strain. She poured more and more of her power into her assault, her movements becoming faster, stronger, wilder. This was it. This was the fight she had been craving. With a final, guttural roar, she launched herself high into the air, flipping over so that she was plummeting down toward him. She channeled all of her remaining energy, all of her Vizard power, into a single, devastating axe kick. Her ultimate technique, Mashiro Super Duper Ultra Storm Axe Kick of Doom. Her descending foot was wreathed in a swirling vortex of green and black spiritual energy. It wasn't just a kick, it was a meteor. An extinction-level event aimed directly at his head. This was her one, decisive blow. Naruto looked up, his blue eyes meeting the descending storm. He knew he couldn't block this with his bare hands. Not without revealing more than he wanted to. But he wouldn't let her win. He didn't draw his sword. He didn't release his Shikai. He simply took a deep breath. And for the first time since the battle with the Ajukas, he let the leash go slack. A wave of Ryutsu erupted from him, a pressure so immense and so cold it made the air crystallize. It was not the warm, living energy of a soul reaper. It was the chilling, predatory pressure of a vasto lord, refined and sharpened to a razor's edge. A faint, swirling pattern of black markings, like flames, spread across the right side of his face. And his right eye bled from blue to the blood-red, slit-pupilled eye of the fox. He didn't form a mask. He didn't need to. His control was absolute. He raised his right hand to meet her descending kick. As her foot, wreathed in its storm of energy, was about to make contact, his palm began to glow with a crimson light. A small, dense sphere of black and red energy, no bigger than a marble, formed in his palm. It spun rapidly, letting out a high-pitched, terrifying whine. The two attacks met. There was no explosion, no cataclysmic boom. There was only a sudden, crushing silence as the two opposing forces annihilated each other. The vortex of energy around Mashiro's foot was sucked into the tiny, spinning sphere in Naruto's hand, vanishing without a trace. Her kick slammed into his open palm, and the world broke. A dome of pure, colorless force erupted from the point of impact, expanding outward in an instant. The raked sand of the courtyard was vaporized. The surrounding buildings groaned, their tiles rattling. Every member of the 9th Division, from Hisagi down to the newest recruit, was thrown off their feet, slammed against walls by a shockwave that was pure, physical force. In the center of the devastation, the two Vizards were frozen, a tableau of immense power. Mashiro's foot was pressed against Naruto's palm, her body trembling with the strain. Naruto hadn't moved a single inch from his spot. He held her aloft, his arm not even trembling, the crimson light in his palm fading away. The hollow mask shattered from Mashiro's face, unable to sustain itself after unleashing so much power. She was back to normal, breathing in huge, ragged gasps, her body screaming with exhaustion. She had put every ounce of her strength into that final blow, and he had simply stopped it. Slowly, gracefully, he lowered her to the ground. She stood on wobbly legs, her whole body aching, and stared at him. His face was back to normal, the flame-like markings gone, his eye calm. Deep blue once more, he looked as if he had just been for a casual stroll. "You failed to land a clean blow," he stated, his voice even, though it now held a new, deeper resonance. "The agreement stands." Mashiro didn't say anything, she just stood there, panting, a slow, massive grin spreading across her exhausted face. She was defeated, utterly, completely, and totally outclassed. And she had never felt more exhilarated in her life. "Wow," she breathed, the word full of awe and adoration. "You're amazing." Naruto looked at her, at the genuine, shining excitement in her eyes. Devoid of any anger or shame at her loss. He saw the pure, unadulterated love of the fight, the respect for power that mirrored the part of him he kept so tightly controlled. For the first time, he felt the corner of his own mouth twitch upward in a ghost of a smile. "Your power is a torrent," he said, his voice softer than before. "A flash flood that carves the land indiscriminately. It's powerful, but it's wasteful." He took a step closer. "If you don't build a riverbed for it to flow through, it will eventually wash away everything, including yourself." His words sank in. It wasn't a boast, it was advice. Genuine, insightful advice from a master of his craft. He respected her power enough to tell her how to make it better. A strange warmth bloomed in her chest, chasing away the exhaustion. "A riverbed," she mumbled, the concept slowly taking root in her hyperactive mind. Around them, the members of the 9th Division were slowly picking themselves up, staring in stunned silence at the crater where their training ground used to be, and at the two figures standing in its center. They had just witnessed a battle of gods, and their quiet, stoic captain had been one of them. Their respect, already absolute, somehow deepened into something approaching reverence. Hisagi just stared, his mind struggling to process the level of power and control his captain had just displayed. He had stopped that monstrous attack and hadn't even drawn his blade. 6 months, Lieutenant Kuna, Naruto said, turning to walk away. "Proper channels. Okay, Foxy Captain," she called after him. Her voice filled with a newfound respect and a whole lot of mischief. "But after 6 months, I want a rematch." He didn't turn around, but she could have sworn she saw him give the slight saint of nods before he disappeared back into the barracks, leaving her standing alone in the wreckage, grinning like an idiot. In a space that was neither the Soul Society nor Hueco Mundo, a place of silent, shifting shadows and impossible geometry, a figure watched a swirling vortex of energy. The vortex replayed the final moments of the spar, Mashiro's hollow feed kick, and Naruto's cold, crimson-eyed response. The figure, cloaked in robes the color of a starless midnight, raised a slender, 3-fingered hand to its featureless face. A voice, ancient and dry as bone dust, echoed in the void, speaking to an unseen presence. "The probe was a success. The markers have been placed." The vortex shifted, showing the broken spiral symbol now invisibly branded on the grounds of District 64. "The initial subjects have been analyzed. Most are predictable. Their power is linear." The image in the vortex focused on Naruto catching Mashiro's kick. It zoomed in on his single, transformed eye, then on the perfect miniature sphere of destructive energy in his palm. "But this one," the voice whispered, a hint of something akin to hunger entering its tone. "This one is different. The soul is a confluence. A perfect paradox, Shinigami, hollow, and something else. Something divine." The figure extended a finger, tracing Naruto's image in the vortex. He is not just a candidate. He may be the key. The shadowy presence behind the figure stirred. Prepare the next phase, the robed figure commanded. The calm has lasted long enough. It is time to see how this key reacts when faced with a true echo of the past. Send the first herald. Let us test the foundation of his carefully constructed piece. The vortex swirled, and a new image appeared within it, a being of pale, cracked porcelain and hollow eyes. Sleeping in a throne of black crystal. A silent, patient weapon, waiting for the command to awaken. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Porcelain Herald and the Whispers of Rust. The silence. In the 5th Division Captain's office was a living thing, thick and suffocating. It was a silence composed of pure, undiluted fury, and it was radiating from Captain Kensai Mugaruma. He sat behind his desk, not looking at the mountain of paperwork he usually complained about, but staring at a single, freshly delivered scroll. A bill, a damage invoice from the Department of Research and Development, NT, for the complete and utter vaporization of 9th Division Training Ground Alpha, including 3 spirit wave dampening pylons and approximately 5,000 cubic meters of consecrated sand. The cost was astronomical, featuring a string of zeros that made his head throb. Across the room, Mashiro Kuna sat Caesar on the floor, a position of formal apology that was so contrary to our nature it was physically painful to watch. She was fidgeting, her hands clenched into fists on her knees, her eyes fixed on a knot in the wooden floorboards. For once, she was utterly quiet. Explain, Kensai finally said. The single word was low and flat, like the rumble of an earthquake just before the ground splits open. We sparred, Mashiro mumbled, her voice uncharacteristically small. You sparred, Kensai repeated, his voice dangerously calm. Mashiro, I have seen the reports from the 9th. I have spoken to a trembling, half-catatonic officer from their reconnaissance corps. What you did was not sparring. It was a localized war. You challenged a captain of the Gote 13 in his own compound, without authorization, and then proceeded to detonate with enough force to register on the 12th Division's seismographs. He picked up the invoice, holding it between 2 fingers as if it were a dead cockroach. They're classifying the energy signature of your final kick as a new, previously uncatalogued Keto spell. He agreed to it, she protested, finally looking up. It was a proper duel. He set the terms and everything. He agreed to it because you screamed in his front yard like a lunatic and kicked at his head. Kensai slammed the invoice down on his desk, making her jump. Do you have any idea the amount of trouble you're in? The trouble you've put me in. This is a diplomatic incident. Forget latrine duty. They could have you scrubbing the shikanmaku with a toothbrush for the next 50 years. Mashiro's face fell. She hadn't thought about any of that. The politics, the rules. She had just seen a challenge, a mountain to climb, and she had thrown herself at it with everything she had. The consequences were a boring, gray afterthought. I didn't think. That's the problem, Mashiro. You never think. Kensai stood up, pacing behind his desk. He ran a hand through his short, silver hair, his frustration warring with a deep, weary affection for his ridiculous lieutenant. What in the world possessed you? He told me my power was a flash flood, she said quietly, the memory of Naruto's words cutting through her fear of Kensai's wrath. He said I needed to build a riverbed for it, or it would wash me away. Kensai stopped pacing. He stared at her, his anger momentarily forgotten, replaced by surprise. That was surprisingly insightful. It was the court same thing he'd been trying to tell her for years, albeit with more shouting and less elegant metaphor. He told you that. She nodded, a strange look on her face. It was a mixture of her usual excitement, but tempered with something new. Ah, he's amazing, Kenny. He didn't even draw his sword. He just stood there. And he was like a rock. I threw everything I had at him, even my super-duper ultra storm axe kick. And he just caught it. Kensai sat back down, the anger draining out of him, replaced by a grim understanding. He knew Naruto Uzumaki's reputation. A quiet prodigy who had mastered his inner hollow to a degree the other Vizards could scarcely comprehend. He had always been an outsider, a silent powerhouse who did his duty with unnerving efficiency. He was respected, even feared, but not truly known. Mashiro, in her own chaotic, Head first way, had just gotten a better measure of the man in a single, disastrous spar than most captains had in 50 years. Before he could formulate another response, the paper door to his office slid open. A member of the Onmitsukido, the stealth force, knelt just inside the doorway, their face covered by a mask. Captain Mugaruma, Lieutenant Kuna, the agent said, their voice a toneless whisper. You are hereby summoned to the audience chamber of the Captain Commander. Effective immediately. Captain Uzumaki has already been summoned. Kensai closed his eyes and let out a long, slow breath. The bill was just the beginning. Now came the reckoning. Understood, he said. He looked at Mashiro, whose face had gone pale. Well, you wanted his attention. You've got it, and now you have the head captains, too. Let's go. The Great Hall of the 1st Division was a place designed to make even the most powerful feel small. The ceiling was impossibly high. The wooden pillars that supported it were ancient and massive, and the sheer weight of spiritual pressure from the man sitting on the dais was enough to make the air feel thick as water. Head Captain Genryusai Shigekuni Yamamoto sat with his eyes closed, his cane resting across his lap. The very picture of ancient, dormant power. Naruto stood on the polished floor before him, his posture perfectly straight. His expression neutral. He had arrived 5 minutes prior and had stood in perfect silence, waiting. Kensai and Mashiro entered, walking to stand a respectful distance to his left. Mashiro, for her part, looked terrified, her usual manic energy completely suppressed by the oppressive atmosphere of the room. She risked a glance at Naruto. He didn't look at her. He didn't seem to look at anything. His gaze fixed on a point just beyond the head captain's throne. He seemed utterly unbothered, a pillar of calm in the face of the Gote 13's ultimate authority. For a full minute, Yamamoto did not speak. The silence was a test, a tool he used to measure the character of those before him. Kensai stood his ground, stoic and respectful. Mashiro fidgeted, her knuckles white where she gripped the folds of her hakama. Naruto remained as still as a statue. Finally, the old man's eyes opened, a slit of molten gold in his wrinkled face. The 9th Division's primary training ground has been annihilated, he stated, his voice the slow, grinding sound of mountains moving. The 12th Division reports a Vizard-class energy discharge that momentarily interfered with the Serite's primary barrier. The cause of this disturbance was an unsanctioned, unmonitored, and unprecedentedly reckless duel between a lieutenant and a captain. His fiery gaze swept over all 3 of them. Explain this. Lapse in discipline. Kensai opened his mouth to speak, to take responsibility for his lieutenant's actions, but Naruto's voice cut in first, smooth and even. The responsibility is mine, Captain Commander. The statement was so simple, so direct, it took everyone, including Yamamoto, by surprise. Kensai and Mashiro both stared at him, stunned. I accepted the lieutenant's challenge, Naruto continued, his voice unwavering. I set the terms of the engagement. And I miscalculated the level of force required to bring the spar to a satisfactory conclusion. The fault for the property damage and the lapse in protocol lies with me, and me alone. He was taking the fall. All of it. He was a captain, and in his mind, anything that happened in his division, or as a result of his direct actions, was his responsibility. It was a simple, absolute code. He wasn't making excuses or trying to mitigate the circumstances. He was stating a fact as he saw it. Mashiro stared at his back, at the stark black number 9 on his haori. Her heart did a strange, painful little flip in her chest. He was protecting her, after she had screamed at him, attacked him, and caused him an unimaginable headache. He was shielding her from the head captain's wrath without a moment's hesitation. Yamamoto's gaze narrowed, focusing entirely on Naruto. You have been a captain for nearly a century, Uzumaki. You have never, in all that time, shown such a lack of foresight. Why accept such a foolish challenge in the first place? Lieutenant Kuna's methods were unorthodox, Naruto conceded, a masterful understatement. However, her intent was pure. She wished to measure her strength. It is an instinct I understand. It seemed more efficient to grant her request under controlled parameters than to allow her uncontrolled energy to fester. My parameters were simply insufficient. Yamamoto was silent for another long moment, stroking his long, white beard. He understood the subtext. Naruto was saying that Mashiro was a force of nature, and he had chosen to redirect the storm rather than try to build a wall against it. He had just underestimated the storm's power. It was a logical, if flawed, assessment. And his willingness to take full responsibility was the mark of a true captain. Very well, Yamamoto rumbled. The 9th Division will be rebuilt. You, Captain Uzumaki, will Urson ally oversee the reconstruction and bear the full cost from your division's discretionary budget. Furthermore, for the next year, all cross-divisional training exercises involving the 9th will require my personal authorization. It was a punishment, but a mild one. A slap on the wrist. As for you, Lieutenant Kuna. Mashiro flinched as the fiery gaze fell upon her. The captain of your Target division has claimed full responsibility, Yamamoto said. This absolves you of official punishment in this matter. However, know this, such a breach of protocol will not be tolerated again. You are a lieutenant of the Gote 13. Conduct yourself accordingly. Am I understood? Why yes, head captain. Crystal clear. Thank you, sir, she stammered, bowing so low her forehead nearly touched the floor. You are all dismissed. With a final, sharp glance, Yamamoto closed his eyes. The audience concluded. Kensai gave Naruto a sharp, questioning look, to which Naruto responded with a barely perceptible nod. They turned and filed out of the great hall, the heavy doors closing behind them with a deep boom. Once they were a safe distance away, Kensai finally spoke. You didn't have to do that, Uzumaki. She was my responsibility. She challenged the captain of the 9th, Naruto replied simply, not slowing his pace. Therefore, she became my responsibility. The matter is concluded. Mashiro hurried to catch up, falling into step beside Naruto. Hey, why did you do that? I'm the one who messed everything up. I should be the one in trouble. Naruto stopped and turned to face her. His blue eyes were as calm as ever. But there was a new depth to them, an analytical curiosity. Punishment is inefficient, he said. It breeds resentment and discourages initiative. You have learned the limits of your unrestrained power. I have learned not to underestimate the depths of your enthusiasm. We both gained valuable data. That is a more productive outcome than you scrubbing floors. She stared at him, her mouth slightly open. He didn't see it as a crime, or a mistake. He saw it as a data-gathering exercise. His mind worked in a way that was so alien, so logical, it was bizarrely fascinating. Now, if you'll excuse me, he said. Giving a nod to Kensai, I have a construction project to oversee. He turned and walked away, his steps measured and silent. Mashiro watched him go, a whirlwind of conflicting emotions swirling inside her. Guilt, gratitude, confusion, and a powerful, undeniable surge of admiration. That guy, she whispered, is a lot more complicated than I gave him credit for, Kensai finished for her. A grudging respect in his own voice. He looked down at his lieutenant. He just gave you a gift, Mashiro. He gave you a lesson, and then he paid for it. Don't waste it. Mashiro looked from Kensai back to Naruto's retreating form. I won't, she said, a new and unfamiliar determination in her voice. I'm gonna build that riverbed. For the next week, Mashiro attacked her training with a fervor that surprised everyone in the 5th Division. But it was a different kind of fervor. The wild, chaotic joy was still there, but it was now aimed at a target. Control. She spent hours in a secluded training ground, not practicing her kicks, but trying to channel her spiritual energy. Her first attempts were disastrous. She tried to fire a focused beam of Ryutsu from her fingertips, a miniature Sero. The resulting blast was anything but miniature. It blew a hole in a nearby hill and sent her tumbling backward, her ears ringing. Too much, she yelled to herself, picking herself up and dusting off her shihakusho. Okay, riverbed, think small. Think, little stream. She tried again, closing her eyes, focusing. She pictured the energy inside her not as an explosion, but as water. She tried to guide a trickle of it, just a tiny stream, to her hand. She could feel it coalescing, a buzzing, angry ball of power. She extended her finger and, fizz pop. Poo. FF of green smoke and a shower of sparks erupted from her fingertip, leaving it tingling and numb. She groaned, falling onto her back in frustration. This was hard, harder than fighting. Kicking things was easy. You just aimed your foot and let the power go. This was like trying to thread a needle in the middle of a hurricane. How did he do it? How did Naruto make it look so effortless? That tiny, perfect sphere of energy he had used to stop her kick, it was a universe of control away from where she was now. But she didn't stop. Day after day, she kept at it, her failures becoming slightly less catastrophic each time. The wild explosions became controlled bursts. The fizzling sparks became a weak but steady pulse of light. She was learning. Slowly, painstakingly, she was beginning to carve the first channels of her riverbed. Unseen, unheard, from the top of a distant barracks, a solitary figure often watched her. Naruto stood in the shadows, his arms crossed, his blue eyes observing her struggles. He had felt the fluctuations in her ryutsu from across the seraite. He had been curious. He had expected her to give up after a day or two, to return to her thoughtless, instinctual style. But she hadn't. He watched her curse in frustration, then square her shoulders and try again. He saw the grim determination warring with her natural impatience. He saw the moments of tiny success and the genuine, brilliant smile that lit up her face when she managed to sustain a focused pulse of energy for more than 3 seconds. And he felt that same strange, unreadable flicker of interest he'd felt during their spar. She was chaos, yes. But she was chaos trying to find a shape. And that, he decided, was a process worth observing. One evening, as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the seraite, Mashiro was slumped against a rock, panting and covered in dirt, utterly exhausted. She had finally managed to carve a thin, wobbly line in the rock face with a focused beam of energy before her control had shattered. It was progress, but it felt agonizingly slow. "You're trying to force it." The voice came from behind her, calm and familiar. She jumped, whirling around to see Naruto standing there. He hadn't made a sound. He just was. "Foxy Captain," she gasped. "Were you watching me? Your spiritual pressure is loud," he replied, ignoring the question. He walked over to the rock, examining the wavering line she had etched into it. "You think of control as a cage, a set of walls to contain your power. So you fight against it, even as you try to build it." He raised his own hand. His index finger pointed at the rock. He wasn't looking at it. He was looking at her. Control is not a cage. It is a lens. It doesn't trap the light. It focuses it. A tiny, brilliant point of pure white light, no bigger than a pinprick, appeared at the tip of his finger. There was no surge of power, no flare of ryutsu. Just a quiet, perfect concentration of energy. He moved his finger, and the point of light glided across the rock, leaving behind a perfectly straight, impossibly thin line, fused into black glass. He then drew a perfect circle, then a complex spiral, the symbol of his own family name. It was done with the casual ease of a master calligrapher drawing with a brush. Mashiro stared, mesmerized. "How? Stop trying to dam the flood," he said, the point of it vanishing as silently as it had appeared. "Become the water. Tell it where to go, and it will follow. You have more than enough power. What you lack is intent." He looked her in the eyes. "What is the purpose of your power, Lieutenant Kuna?" The question caught her completely off guard. The purpose of her power. It was, for fighting. For fun. For kicking bad guys. She had never thought about it any more deeply than that. I don't know," she admitted, the answer feeling strangely inadequate. Naruto simply nodded, as if that was the answer he had expected. "Find one," he said. "Then the river will have a reason to flow." He turned and vanished in a flicker of shunpo, leaving her alone with his words and the perfectly etched spiral glowing faintly in the twilight. The purpose of her power. It was a question that echoed in the new, quiet spaces she was starting to carve inside herself. The alarm came without warning. Not the piercing wail of a hollow incursion, but a deep, resonant qigong that shook the very foundations of the seraite. It was an ancient signal, one that had not been used in centuries. The signal for a direct assault on the seraite itself. Naruto was in his office, reviewing the final schematics for the new training ground, when the sound hit. His head snapped up, his placid ryutsu instantly sharpening to a razor's edge. He was at the window in an instant, his eyes fixed on the sky. The Shikanmaku, the great spiritual barrier that protected the Soul Society's heart, was shimmering, distorting. Something was pressing against it from the outside. not trying to break through, but unmaking it. Large, rust-colored patches were spreading across the normally invisible dome, flaking away into nothingness like ancient, corroded metal. Captain, Hisagi burst into the room, his hand on his Zanpakuto. The barrier is failing. Multiple points of decay. We're getting no energy readings. It's just falling apart. Mobilize the division, Naruto ordered, his voice ice cold. Full defensive posture. This is not a hollow. He was gone before Hisagi could even reply, a black and orange blur heading for the point of greatest decay. Other captains were already moving. Flashes of light crisscrossing the sky as the Gote-13 responded to the impossible threat. He arrived at the western wall just as a massive section of the barrier crumbled into brown dust. Through the newly formed hole, a figure drifted into the seraite. It was humanoid, about 8 feet tall, and its body seemed to be made of cracked, off-white porcelain. It had no discernible face, just a smooth, blank surface. Its limbs were long and thin, ending in sharp, pointed fingers. It moved with a slow, deliberate grace that was utterly unnerving, its feet never touching the ground. It was completely silent, radiating an aura of profound emptiness, a void where spiritual pressure should have been. This was the Porcelain Herald. 2 lieutenants, from the 7th and 10th divisions, were the first to engage. "What the hell is that thing?" one shouted, launching a powerful Kido spell, a torrent of lightning, at the intruder. The herald didn't dodge, it simply raised a hand. The lightning struck its palm and sizzled into nothing, its energy seemingly devoured. The porcelain of its hand now glowed with faint, crackling lines. "My turn," the other lieutenant said, releasing his shikai. He lunged forward, his blade aimed at the creature's chest. The herald met the blade with its own pointed fingers. The moment the steel touched the porcelain, a horrifying transformation began. A rust-colored blight spread from the point of contact, racing up the length of the Zanpakuto. The lieutenant cried out in shock as his blade began to flake and crumble in his hands, turning to oxidized dust in a matter of seconds. The herald's other hand shot out, touching the lieutenant's chest. The rust spread to his shihakusho, then to his very skin. He screamed, a choked, horrified sound, as his body began to decay. Breaking apart like a 1,000-year-old statue. Naruto, watching from a rooftop 50 yards away, felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. This was the power he had sensed before, the static. It wasn't an energy attack. It was an anti-energy, a principle of decay, of entropy, given form. It didn't destroy, it simply ended things. More Soul Reapers arrived, more attacks were launched, and each one failed in the same horrifying way. Kido was absorbed, Zanpakuto were rusted into oblivion. The herald moved through them like a ghost, silent and unstoppable, each touch bringing swift, terrifying decay. Panic was beginning to set in. "Fall back. Maintain distance." Naruto's voice roared across the battlefield, cutting through the fear. The authority in his tone was absolute, and the desperate Shinigami immediately obeyed, creating a wide circle around the silent intruder. Naruto dropped from the rooftop, landing softly on the cobblestones. He didn't draw his sword. He simply stood there, his blue eyes locked on the faceless thing before him. The herald stopped its advance, its blank face turning to regard him. It seemed to recognize him as the dominant threat in the area. For the first time, a sound emanated from it, a soft, whispering hiss like sand falling on old paper. The sound whispered, not in his ears, but directly in his mind. "The confluence, you will be unmade." It drifted toward him, one porcelain hand raised, the whispers of rust gathering around its fingertips. Naruto knew Kyuubi would be useless. The herald's power was a direct counter to a physical blade. But he was more than just his sword. He raised his own hand, palm out. But instead of the dense, Vizard-like sphere he had used against Mashiro, he did something different. He called upon the purest essence of his Shinigami power, pouring it into a complex Kido matrix he formed in his mind. Bakudo number 81, Danku. A massive, transparent wall of energy erupted into existence between him and the herald. It was one of the most powerful defensive spells known, capable of blocking even the most destructive Hado. The herald's hand touched the wall. The rust-colored decay spread across the translucent barrier. But it was slower this time. The pure spiritual energy of the Danku was resisting, fighting back against the entropy. But it was a losing battle. Cracks of brown and ore age spread across the wall like veins of corrosion. It was going to fail. Naruto used the precious seconds he had bought. His mind raced. Physical attacks were useless. Standard energy attacks were being absorbed or decayed. He needed something that wasn't purely one or the other. He needed a paradox to fight a paradox. The Danku shattered, crumbling into glittering dust. The herald drifted through the remains. Its hand now aimed directly at Naruto's heart. Naruto didn't retreat. He took a step forward. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and once again, let the leash on his inner storm go slack. But this time, he didn't let the hollow power simply erupt. He guided it, shaped it, using the very lessons he had just taught Mashiro. He didn't build a cage or a lens. He created a vortex. His Shinigami Ryutsu, warm and golden, swirled in his right hand. His hollow Ryutsu, cold and crimson, swirled in his left. He brought his hands together in front of his chest, and the two opposing energies did not merge. They coiled around each other, a perfect, spinning helix of life and void, creation and consumption, held in a delicate, impossible balance. The herald was almost upon him, its fingers inches from his chest. Rasengan, Naruto whispered, the name a forgotten echo from a life he no longer remembered. He thrust his hands forward. The spiraling sphere of dual energies, a perfect storm of contradiction, slammed into the porcelain herald's chest. There was no rust. There was no decay. The herald's power of entropy had nothing to purchase on an attack that was simultaneously creating and destroying itself at the same time. For the first time, the silent, unstoppable creature was met with a force it could not absorb, could not unmake. A piercing shriek, the sound of tearing reality, erupted from the herald as the spiraling sphere ground into its porcelain body. Cracks, not of rust but of pure force, spread across its chest. It was thrown backward, tumbling through the air, and slammed into the outer wall of a barracks, shattering stone and timber. Naruto stood in the silence, breathing heavily, the helix of energy in his hand slowly dissipating. He had heard it. He had found a way. But as the dust settled, the herald rose from the wreckage. A massive, gaping hole was torn in its torso, but the porcelain was already reforming, knitting itself back together with a soft, grinding sound. Its blank face turned to him, and the whisper in his mind was stronger this time, laced with a cold, terrifying fury. The process cannot be stopped. The foundation will be erased. The age of rust has come. It raised both hands, and the air around it began to shimmer and decay. The very cobblestones at its feet turned to brown dust. The threat wasn't over. It had just begun. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. Dissonant blades and a river's new course. The silence that followed the herald's pronouncement was heavier than any sound. It was the silence of a tomb, ancient and absolute. Naruto stood his ground, the remnants of the dual energy Rasengan dissipating from his hands, his senses screaming at him. The creature before him wasn't just regenerating, it was adapting. The air around the herald began to shimmer. Not with heat, but with a visible aura of decay. The cobblestones at its feet didn't just turn to dust, they were being erased from existence, leaving behind smooth, featureless ground. The very space around it was unraveling. The foundation will be erased, the whisper echoed in his mind again, and Naruto understood. It wasn't just a threat. It was a statement of purpose. He moved, his shunpo a blur of motion. He couldn't afford a direct confrontation. He had to stay mobile, to probe for another opening. He appeared behind the herald, his hand already forming. The seals for a mid-level lightning spell. Hado number 63, Reikoho. A torrent of yellow lightning erupted from his palm. The herald didn't even turn. The decay aura around its body simply thickened for a moment, and the lightning spell, a blast that could cripple an Ajukas, was consumed before it could travel 5 feet, its energy feeding the rust-colored shimmer. The herald pivoted with an unnatural grace, one of its porcelain hands lashing out. Naruto was already gone, reappearing on a nearby rooftop, his heart pounding with a cold, tactical rhythm. This was impossible. It was an enemy that devoured every conventional weapon. Physical attacks were corroded. Energy attacks were absorbed. It was a perfect defense. Flashes of light announced the arrival of reinforcements. Captain Byakuya-ku, Chiki of the 6th Division materialized in a shower of cherry blossoms, his hand already on the hilt of his Zanpakuto. Captain Toshiro Hitsugaya of the 10th landed beside him, a wave of cold air rolling off him. His young face set in a grim mask. Captain Uzumaki, Byakuya stated, his voice the epitome of aristocratic calm, though his eyes betrayed his shock at the scene of decay. Report the situation. Its ability is absolute decay, Naruto called down, his voice sharp and focused. It corrodes physical matter and absorbs energy-based attacks. Do not allow it to touch your Zanpakuto. HMPH. Insolent, Byakuya murmured, though he took the warning to heart. He raised his blade. Scatter, Senbon Sakura. His sword dissolved into a swirling storm of 1,000 microscopic blades, a beautiful and deadly vortex of steel. The pink blizzard surged toward the herald, aiming to shred it from 1,000 angles at once. But as the cloud of petals entered the herald's decay aura, a horrifying thing happened. The leading edge of the storm turned from shimmering pink to a dull, ugly brown. The blades of Senbon Sakura were rusting, crumbling into inert dust mid-flight. The attack was being UNM'd before it could ever reach its target. Byakuya's eyes widened in disbelief. His pride, his perfect, unbeatable offense, had been neutralized with utter contempt. Bankai, Hitsugaya roared, not waiting for his own Shikai to fail. Daiguren Hirenmaru, massive wings of ice erupted from his back, and the temperature in the entire district plummeted. An enormous dragon of ice and freezing spiritual energy formed in the air, its roar shaking the very stones of the Seraite. It dove at the herald, intending to encase it in a prison of absolute zero. The herald simply raised its hand. The decay aura flared, and the colossal ice dragon met a wall of entropy. The ice didn't just melt, it sublimated, turning directly from a solid into a fine, gray mist that then vanished into nothing. The dragon's head disintegrated, then its neck, its body, the entire majestic construct crumbling away into nothingness a few feet from its silent, unmoving target. Impossible, Hitsugaya breathed, the cold fury on his face replaced by sheer, dumbfounded shock. The herald, having effortlessly dismantled the attacks of two of the Gotei 13's most powerful captains, began to drift forward again, its attention returning to Naruto, whom it had identified as the primary threat. The key. It was then that a new presence arrived on the battlefield. Not with the silent grace of a captain, but with a frantic, chaotic burst of speed that ended in a sliding halt on a nearby rooftop. Mashiro Kuna stared at the scene, her bug-eyed goggles pushed up on her forehead, her breath catching in her throat. She had felt Naruto's Ryutsu spike, a cold, sharp feeling so different from his usual calm, and had followed it. Now she saw why. She saw the crumbling ground, the stunned looks on the faces of two of the most famously powerful captains, and the silent, white creature that radiated an aura of pure dread. She saw it advance on Naruto, and a fierce, protective instinct flared in her chest, so hot and sharp it surprised her. She watched as Naruto moved, not attacking, but weaving a complex pattern of shunpo, forcing the herald to turn, to follow, his movements a constant analysis of its speed and reach. He wasn't fighting it, he was studying it, he was looking for the seam in its perfect defense. She remembered his words, echoing in her mind with perfect clarity. Control is a lens. Find a purpose. She looked at Byakuya's scattered, useless petals, at the dissipating mist that was once Hitsugaya's Bankai. They had used overwhelming power, flash floods of their own. And they had failed. Naruto wasn't using overwhelming power. He was using precision. He was using his mind. He was trying to become the water, to flow around the rock that could not be broken. A new understanding began to dawn in Mashiro's mind. A tactical clarity she had never before possessed. The creature's defense was an aura, a field of decay. But a field had to have a source. It had to have a range. And it seemed to be weakest at the very center of the creature itself, where Naruto's strange spiraling attack had struck. The key wasn't to overwhelm the aura. The key was to pierce it. Naruto, meanwhile, had come to a similar conclusion. The decay was a field. And a field could be disrupted. He didn't have an attack that could break through it again without a significant power-up, and he didn't want to reveal his full Vizard transformation unless absolutely necessary. But maybe he didn't need to break it. Maybe he just needed to bend it. He appeared 100 yards in front of the herald, his hands already a blur of motion. This was a risk. A massive, insane risk. He was about to use one of the most complex and draining Bakudo spells in existence, not as a defense, but as a momentary offensive tool. Bakudo number 79. Kuyo Shibari. 9 massive pillars of black energy erupted from the ground in a circle around the herald. But instead of slamming inward to bind it, Naruto inverted the spell's purpose. With a guttural roar of effort, he forced the pillars to project their energy outward. For a single, agonizing second, the space within the circle of pillars was violently distorted, the herald's decay aura stretched thin. Pulled away from its body like a sheet being snapped taut. The air around the herald's porcelain chest shimmered and cleared. An opening. Now, Naruto yelled, his voice strained. He expected a blast from Hitsugaya, a renewed assault from Byakuya. But it was Mashiro who moved. In that instant, everything Naruto had told her, everything she had struggled with for the past week, clicked into a single, perfect thought. Purpose. Her purpose, right now, was to hit the thing in the chest where Naruto had hit it. Not with a storm, with a needle. She didn't use Shunpo. She used Sonido. The high-pitched zip cut through the air, and she was gone from the rooftop. She crossed the distance in less time than it took Byakuya's eyes to widen. She wasn't a whirlwind. She was a bullet. All her chaotic, explosive Vizard power, the energy she normally threw around with wild abandon, was pulled inward. She dragged it from her limbs, from her core, from the very depths of her soul, and forced it down her right leg. She wasn't building a riverbed anymore. She was channeling the entire river, the entire flash flood, through a pipe the width of a single hair. She spun, not in a wild, flashy axe kick, but in a simple, brutally efficient roundhouse, and at the very tip of her boot, a tiny point of light appeared. It was a sphere of her own spiritual pressure, green and black, swirling with the chaotic energy of her inner hollow, but compressed, focused, and contained into a marble of pure, destructive intent. It was ugly, it was unstable, but it was hers. The pillars of Naruto's Bakudo began to crack. The strain too much to hold. The decay aura began to snap back into place. Mashiro's foot struck home. The tiny, compressed sphere of Vizard energy made contact with the herald's chest. In the very center of the crater Naruto's Rasengan had left behind. There was no grand explosion. There was a sharp, piercing crack, like a diamond shattering under immense pressure. Mashiro's paradoxical attack, a point of pure, focused chaos, bypassed the decaying field in the split-second opening Naruto had given her. It didn't try to overpower the herald's nature. It introduced a new one. An instability it could not compute. Could not decay. The crack spread. Spiderwebbing lines of black shot across the herald's porcelain body. It froze, its blank face tilted downward as if to examine the point of impact. A low, grinding sound filled the air, and then, with a final, silent scream that echoed only in the minds of those present, the porcelain herald exploded. It didn't turn to dust. It shattered into a million tiny, white shards. The entropy that powered it finally turned against itself. Silence descended on the battlefield, broken only by Mashiro's heavy panting as she landed, her leg trembling from the sheer effort of her focused attack. The captain stared, utterly speechless. Byakuya, Hitsugaya, and the dozens of other Soul Reapers who had witnessed the battle could not process what had just happened. They had seen their strongest attacks fail, only to watch the notoriously undisciplined lieutenant of the 5th Division deliver the finishing blow with a technique of impossible precision. In the center of the clearing where the herald had stood, a single object clattered to the ground. It was a shard of crystal, the size of a fist, pulsing with a dull, rust-colored light. Before anyone could move, it emitted a single, high-pitched whine that vibrated in their very bones. The crystal dissolved, turning into a cloud of the same familiar, chaotic static Naruto had sensed before. And then vanished completely. Naruto let his Bakudo collapse, breathing heavily from the strain. He looked at the spot where the herald had been, then he looked at Mashiro. She was standing there, leaning forward with her hands on her knees, trying to catch her breath, a look of pure, dazed shock on her own face. She looked up and met his gaze. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't shocked. He was impressed. His blue eyes held a look of clear, unambiguous approval. The corner of his mouth twitched, this time into a small, but genuine, smile. He gave her a single, sharp nod. For Mashiro, that nod was like a bolt of lightning. It was more potent than any cheer, more valuable than any medal. It was acknowledgement. It was respect. It was the master telling the apprentice that she had finally, truly understood the lesson. A huge, triumphant, exhausted grin spread across her face. Captain Uzumaki. Byakuya's voice cut through the moment, sharp and demanding. What was that creature? And what was that technique? Lieutenant Kuna. The spell was broken. The reality of the situation crashed back in. They had won, but they had no idea what they had just fought. Naruto's brief smile vanished, replaced by his usual stoic mask. He walked over to where the other captains were gathering. It called itself a herald, he said, his voice low and serious. And it is the harbinger of an enemy we do not understand. An enemy that can unravel the very fabric of our power. He glanced back at Mashiro, who was now being helped up by a stunned Rengoku Matsumoto. She had found her purpose, at least for a moment. And in doing so, she had not only saved the day, but had also irrevocably altered her own path. The chaotic, joyous flash flood was gone. In its place, a river had begun to flow, and its course was now inextricably tangled with that of the quiet, powerful Vizard captain of the 9th Division. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. Political Shadows and the Weight of Recognition. The aftermath of the Herald's incursion was a different kind of chaos. The physical damage to the outer wall and the district was significant, but the psychological damage to the Gote 13 was far greater. A single enemy had breached the Seraite, rendered the powers of two captains useless, and was only defeated through a desperate, improvised collaboration between a notoriously insular captain and a notoriously undisciplined lieutenant. The sense of invincibility that permeated the Soul Society had been cracked, and through that crack, the cold winds of doubt and political opportunism were blowing. The Central 46, the supreme judiciary body of the Soul Society, had called an emergency summons. It was not a trial, they claimed, but an inquiry. The Great Chamber was a circular, imposing room, th 46 seated figures hidden behind screens, looking down into a central pit where the summoned stood. Naruto stood in the center, flanked by Byakuya Kuchiki and Toshiro Hitsugaya. Kensai Muguru, Ma and Mashiro Kuna stood slightly behind them. The atmosphere was suffocating, a palpable weight of judgment and suspicion. Captain Uzumaki, a voice echoed from behind one of the high screens, aged and dripping with aristocratic disdain. Your report indicates that this herald possessed the ability to negate spiritual attacks. Yet, you and Lieutenant Kuna were able to destroy it. Explain this contradiction. It was not a contradiction, Naruto replied, his voice calm, carrying easily in the acoustics of the chamber. The entity's ability was not absolute negation. It was a localized field of entropy. It decayed matter and absorbed energy. However, it had limits. By stressing the field with a high-level bakudo, a momentary weakness was created. Lieutenant Kuna exploited that weakness with a highly focused physical strike imbued with dense spiritual pressure. A highly focused strike from Lieutenant Kuna. Another voice scoffed. The reports on Lieutenant Kuna characterize her fighting style as reckless, unrefined, and prone to collateral damage. Are we to believe she suddenly developed master-level Ryutsu control in the heat of battle? Kensai bristled, about to speak up in defense of his lieutenant. But Naruto raised a hand, silencing him without looking back. People are not static entities, Naruto said, his tone hardening slightly. They learn. They adapt. Lieutenant NT Kuna has been undergoing intense training to refine her abilities. Under extreme pressure, she applied those lessons. To dismiss her achievement based on past performance is a tactical error. It is also an insult to a soldier of the Gote 13 who risked her life to defend this institution. Silence fell over the chamber. No one spoke back to the Central 46 like that. Not even captains. Behind him, Mashiro's eyes widened. He was doing it again. Defending her. Not just taking the blame, but actively championing her competence in front of the highest authority in the Soul Society. A warmth that had nothing to do with Ryutsu bloomed in her chest. Be that as it may, a third voice interjected, smoother, more oily. The nature of the attack raises concerns. You used a technique, Captain Uzumaki. One not found in the standard Kido curriculum. A spinning sphere of energy. Reports suggest it contained traces of hollow Ryutsu. The trap was sprung. The Vizard nature of the captains was an open secret within the Gote 13. Tolerated because of their power and loyalty, but it was a sore point for the conservative, traditionalist Central 46. They were looking for a scapegoat for the breach. A reason to tighten their leash on these abominations. I utilized all resources at my disposal to neutralize a threat that had already rendered the abilities of Captain Kuchiki and Captain Hitsugaya ineffective, Naruto stated. Not denying the accusation, but reframing it. He did not look at the other two captains, but the implication hung heavy in the air. I did what was necessary when others failed. Byakuya's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Hitsugaya scowled. It was a brutal, factual statement, and it stung because it was true. Are you suggesting, Captain Uzumaki, that the purity of a Shinigami's power is insufficient? The voice pressed, sensing blood. That reliance on these darker impulses is necessary for the defense of the Seraite. This was dangerous ground. A wrong answer could lead to imprisonment. Or worse. I suggest, Naruto said, his voice dropping a whole octave, becoming a low, resonant rumble that vibrated with suppressed power, that when an enemy appears, that can turn our Zanpakuto to rust and drink our Kido, we do not have the luxury of philosophical debates about the purity of our power. We use what works. We survive. Or would this august body prefer a pristine, ideologically pure ruin? The silence that followed was absolute. It was a direct challenge, a slap in the face of their dogmatic worldview with the cold, hard gauntlet of reality. For a long moment, no one spoke. Finally, the head judge spoke, his voice clipped. This inquiry is adjourned. The Gote 13 will continue its investigation into the origin of this herald. Captain Uzumaki, Lieutenant Kuna, your actions, while unorthodox, were effective. You are dismissed. It was a dismissal, but it felt like a retreat. Naruto bowed minimally, turned on his heel, and walked out of the pit, the others following. Outside the chamber, in the long, sunlit corridor, the tension finally broke. That was intense, Hitsugaya muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. Byakuya looked at Naruto. Your words were harsh, Uzumaki. But not inaccurate. My gratitude for your intervention on the battlefield. It was as close to an apology and a thank you as the proud noble would ever get. Naruto nodded. Gratitude is unnecessary, Captain Kuchiki. We are on the same side. As the other captains departed, Kensai let out a long, explosive sigh. You have a talent for making powerful enemies, Naruto. You practically dared them to arrest you. They won't, Naruto said calmly. They're frightened. Frightened people don't eliminate their strongest shields, no matter how much they dislike them. He turned to Mashiro. She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. It was a mix of awe, gratitude, and something deeper, something more personal. You did well in there, he said to her, referring to the battle. Not the inquiry. Your control held. Your aim was true. Mashiro beamed, the tension of the hearing evaporating instantly. I did, didn't I? I was like a laser. Zip pow, and that porcelain creep just shattered. She bounced on her toes, her energy returning in a rush. And you were amazing in there, foxy captain. You told those old guys what for. Would you prefer a pure ruin? So cool. It was a statement of fact, Naruto said, but the ghost of a smile touched his lips again. So, Mashiro said, stepping closer, a mischievous glint returning to her eyes. Since we're such a great team, and since I totally saved your bacon back there, I had the situation under control, Naruto corrected mildly. Totally saved your bacon, she insisted, grinning. I think you owe me. Not a rematch. Something better. Kensai groaned. Mashiro, don't push your luck. Naruto looked at her, intrigued despite himself. What do you propose, Lieutenant? Dinner, she declared. Thinking is hard work. Fighting is hard work. Getting yelled at by old people is hard work. I'm starving. You, me, tonight. A victory feast. My treat. Well, actually, Kenny's treat, since he has the division expense card. Hey, Kensai protested. Naruto paused. He almost never socialized. His evenings were spent in meditation, training, or solitary contemplation. The idea of a noisy, chaotic dinner with Mashiro Kuna was practically anathema to his routine. Yet, as he looked at her hopeful, Grinning face, he found that the idea wasn't entirely unpleasant. She had proven herself. She was no longer just a source of noise. She was a capable warrior who was learning to harness her potential, largely due to his influence. Very well, Naruto said. Both Kensai and Mashiro froze. Kensai looked like he'd just seen a ghost. Mashiro looked like she'd just won the lottery. Really? She squeaked. Really? Naruto confirmed. Assuming the establishment serves ramen. Yes. Mashiro pumped a fist in the air. I know the perfect place. Best ramen in the Rukongai. Meet you at the west gate at sundown. Don't be late, Foxy Captain. With that, she grabbed a stunned Kensai by the arm and dragged him away. Already chattering excitedly about pork broth and extra noodles. Naruto watched them go, shaking his head slightly. He was walking into a different kind of storm now, one made of noodles and boundless enthusiasm. And surprisingly, he found he wasn't dreading it at all. The ramen stand in District 1 of the Rukongai was small, crowded, and filled with steam and the noise of happy eaters. It was a world away from the sterile halls of the Central 46. Naruto and Mashiro sat at the counter on wobbly stools, empty bowls stacked in front of them. Naruto had eaten 5, Mashiro, in a feat that defied physics given her small frame, had eaten 7. I'm telling you, Mashiro said between slurps of broth from her 8th bowl, the secret to the kick was picturing Kenny's face when he saw the bill for your training ground. It gave me that extra oomph of focus. Naruto chuckled, a low, genuine sound that seemed to surprise even the old man running the stall. He was relaxed, his Apton's haori draped over the back of his stool, the top buttons of his uniform undone. It was a side of him no one in the Seraite ever saw. Fear of reprimand is a powerful motivator, Naruto agreed, taking a sip of sake from a small ceramic cup. Though I believe your success had more to do with your own determination than Captain Muguruma's wallet. Mashiro stopped eating and looked at him. Her cheeks were flushed from the heat of the soup and the sake. You really think so? I know so, he said, meeting her gaze. You have a rare gift, Mashiro. Your instinct is flawless. Your raw power is immense. You were just lacking direction. Today, you found it. Mashiro felt her heart do that strange flip again. Hearing him use her first name, hearing him praise her so sincerely, without any of Kensai's usual exasperation, made her feel seen. Really, truly seen. It was thanks to you, she said softly, putting down her chopsticks. Your advice about the riverbed. And the way you fight. It makes sense to me now. It's not about not being a Vizard. It's about being the boss of it. Like you were with your fox. Naruto's expression became serious, but not cold. He placed his cup down. It is a constant negotiation. The power is a part of us, but it is a wild, hungry part. If you ignore it, it rebels. If you indulge it, it consumes you. You must acknowledge it, respect it, but never, ever let it forget who holds the leash. He tapped his chest, over his heart. The seal is not just on your soul. It is in your will. Today, for a moment, your will was absolute. You made the power serve your purpose, not its own hunger. Mashiro nodded slowly, absorbing his words. I want to be able to do that all the time. Like you. It takes time, Naruto said. Patience. Discipline. I can do discipline, she declared, puffing out her chest. Then she deflated slightly. Well, I can try. For a little while, if it means I can get strong enough to fight by your side again. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Fight by your side, not just as a subordinate, but as a partner. Naruto looked at her for a long moment. In the warm light of the lanterns, surrounded by the noise of the stall. The distance he always kept between himself and the world seemed to shrink. He saw the earnestness in her eyes, the raw potential, the genuine connection that had formed between them in the crucible of battle and the shadow of political judgment. Perhaps, he said softly. We shall see. It wasn't a promise, but coming from Naruto Uzumaki, it was more than enough. He moment was broken by a sudden shift in the atmosphere. It wasn't a sound, or a visual cue. It was a feeling. A sudden, sickening drop in spiritual pressure across the entire district, followed instantly by a spike of that same cold, rusty static. Naruto was on his feet in an instant, his haori snatched from the stool and thrown over his shoulders in one fluid motion. His eyes were hard, the relaxed companion gone. Replaced instantly by the captain. Mashiro, he commanded, his voice low and urgent. She was already up, her noodles forgotten, her expression mirroring his. I feel it. It's everywhere. They stepped out of the stall into the night. The sky above the Rukongai was no longer black. It was a bruised, sickly shade of purplish-brown. And in the distance, rising from the horizon, in 4 different directions around the Seraite, were massive, silent pillars of rust-colored light, connecting the earth to the corrupted sky. The static in Naruto's mind roared, the pieces of the puzzle finally slamming together into a horrifying picture. The brand in District 64. The probe by the Ajukas. The herald's attack on the wall. They were all preparations. This wasn't an incursion, Naruto said, his hand gripping the hilt of Kyubi. It's a siege. The emergency bells of the Seraite began to toll, a frantic, ceaseless clamor that echoed into the night. The peace was over. The age of rust had truly begun. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The rust-colored sky and a shared resolve. The steam and laughter of the ramen stand vanished, replaced by a sudden, chilling silence that fell over the entire district. The very air grew thin, as if the world were holding its breath. Naruto and Mashiro stood frozen, not by fear, but by the sheer, horrifying scale of what was happening. 4 colossal pillars of rust-colored light now dominated the horizon, silent and terrible against a sky that had turned the color of a day-old bruise. They were spaced in a perfect, equidistant ring around the Seraite, a cage of decaying light. It's a barrier, Naruto said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He was already processing the tactical implications. They're not just attacking. They're isolating us, cutting us off. The emergency bells began their frantic, desperate tolling within the Seraite walls, a sound of pure panic that was a stark contrast to the silent menace of the pillars. The ambient spiritual energy of the Rukongai, the low, constant hum of countless souls, was guttering like a dying candle. Naruto could feel it being drawn toward the pillars, siphoned away into the corrupting light. What do we do? Mashiro asked, her voice tight. The playful energy was gone, replaced by the sharp, focused edge of a warrior. She looked to him, her trust absolute. We get back inside, Naruto commanded, his eyes scanning the darkening streets. The Gote 13 will be mobilizing. We need to be a part of that response. He turned to her, his blue eyes sharp and intense. Stay close. No reckless charges. We move as one. Understood. Understood, she replied without hesitation. It wasn't an order from a captain to a lieutenant anymore. It was an agreement between partners facing a storm. They didn't wait for another word. In a synchronized flicker of movement, they were gone from the street, 2 blurs of black and green racing across the rooftops toward the west gate. The journey that should have taken minutes was now a desperate race through a world that was actively dying around them. The joyful noise of the Rukongai had been replaced by a growing murmur of fear, the sea rise of confusion and the whimpers of souls who felt their very essence being drained away. They were halfway to the gate when the first of them appeared. They rose from the shadows of the alleyways, shambling into the dim light. They were humanoid in shape, but their bodies were made of what looked like tightly compressed flakes of rust, constantly shedding a fine brown dust. They had no faces, only smooth, blank surfaces. And they moved with a jerky, unnatural gait. They were the corroded, the foot soldiers of this new, terrifying enemy. One of them spotted the 2 Shinigami on the rooftops. It let out no sound, but simply raised a corroded arm. A wave of the familiar, entropic energy washed toward them, not as a beam, but as a silent, invisible tide that caused the roof tiles in its path to crumble into powder. Left, Naruto barked. They broke in opposite directions, the wave of decay passing harmlessly between them. They're everywhere, Mashiro called out, landing lightly on a lower rooftop. Below her, a dozen more of the corroded were shambling out into the street, their blank faces turning in unison to track the 2 sources of potent spiritual energy. They're slow, Naruto observed, his mind a whirlwind of tactical analysis. And their decay field seems to be a directed, frontal attack. We can't fight them all. We need to break through. A group of 5 corroded on a rooftop ahead of them blocked their path. Naruto didn't hesitate. Bakudo number 61, Raikujokuro. 6 wide beams of yellow light shot from his fingertips, slamming into the corroded and binding them in a cage of solidified light. It was a perfect, textbook execution of the spell. But as soon as the light made contact, it began to fizzle and corrode. It won't hold them for long. Naruto yelled. Mashiro, now, straight through the middle. Mashiro didn't need to be told twice. She understood the strategy instantly. He wasn't trying to stop them. He was just trying to buy her a single second. She pushed off, her body low and aerodynamic. Her Vizard power, which had been buzzing under her skin since the pillars appeared, now flared, but it was a controlled flare. She funneled it into a single, focused point. A laser, she thought. The memory of her success against the Herald, a guiding star in the chaos. She zipped past Naruto, a green comet. The corroded, still struggling against the decaying Keto spell, turned to face her. They unleashed their waves of entropy, but she was too fast, a blur moving between the invisible tides of their attacks. She spun, not a wide, flashy kick, but a tight, viciously efficient corkscrew. Her leg a living drill. Mashiro needle point, she screamed, the new name coming to her in a flash of inspiration. Her foot, wreathed in that same tiny, focused sphere of green-black energy, pierced the chest of the first corroded. It shattered like brittle pottery. Without losing momentum, she angled her body, her other foot lashing out to obliterate a second. The 3 remaining ones were turning to bring their attacks to bear on her, but the Raikujokuro finally gave way, and Naruto was already there. He hadn't drawn Kyuubi. He moved through them like a ghost, his hands a blur. A precise palm heel strike to the torso of one, imbued with a sharp pulse of his unique Shinigami Hollow Ryutsu, caused it to destabilize and crumble. He spun, grabbing another by its head and shoulder, and simply twisted. The corroded form came apart in his hands. He finished the last one with a simple, powerful kick that shattered it completely. The entire engagement had lasted less than 5 seconds. They stood back to back for a moment amidst the settling brown dust, breathing in the corrupted air. Good work, Naruto said, his voice calm and steady. Your focus is holding. You're not so bad yourself. Foxy Captain, she shot back, a grin touching her lips despite the grim situation. Not even breaking a sweat. Their synergy was terrifyingly effective. His control and tactical mind created the openings. And her speed and focused power provided the devastating, decisive blow. They were a perfect, paradoxical weapon. The unmovable object and the unstoppable force, working in perfect harmony. They didn't linger. They pushed on, fighting their way through a dozen more small skirmishes, their movements becoming more fluid, more synchronized with each encounter. Naruto would use a low-level Keto to distract or bind, and Mashiro would flash in to deliver the killing blow. He was the strategist, she was the spearhead. They reached the massive West Gate just as a squad of 10th Division members, led by Rangaku Matsumoto, was desperately trying to repel a horde of corroded pouring through the streets. Lieutenant Kuna, Captain Uzumaki, Rangaku cried out, AMI. XTURE of relief and surprise on her face. What are these things? No time, Naruto commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. Fall back and secure the gate. We'll clear a path. Without waiting for a reply, he and Mashiro plunged into the fray. The 10th Division squad watched in awe as the duo moved through the horde of corroded like a force of nature. A wordless dance of strategy and destruction. Naruto would appear in the middle of a group, a swirling vortex of precise, debilitating strikes, never killing, but breaking their forms, disrupting their attacks. And in his wake, Mashiro would follow. A green flash of focused kicks and punches that shattered the destabilized enemies into dust. In less than a minute, the street was clear. The surviving 10th Division members stared, dumbfounded. Secure this position, Naruto ordered Rangaku, his captain's authority absolute. Let no one in or out without authorization from the 1st Division. We're heading to the emergency assembly. Rangaku, shaken but professional, just nodded. Yes, Captain. Naruto and Mashiro were gone again, leaving a stunned but grateful squad to fortify the gate. The siege had begun, but in this one small corner of the Soul Society. 2 Vizards had just given the Gote 13 its first victory. The main assembly hall of the 1st Division was a hive of controlled panic. Every captain available was present, their lieutenants standing behind them. The mood was grim, the air thick with tension and the constant, unnerving tolling of the emergency bells. Head Captain Yamamoto stood before them, his ancient face carved from granite. His Ryutsu a simmering volcano that kept the rampant fear from boiling over. "Reports," he barked. Captain Mayuri Kuretsuchi stepped forward, a manic, gleeful light in his eyes that was completely at odds with the situation. "Fascinating," he hissed. "Utterly fascinating. The 4 pillars are generating a containment field of an energy I have tentatively designated entropic chi. It does not behave like Ryutsu at all. It actively consumes it. The field is acting as a siphon, draining the ambient reishi of the Seraite and the Rukongai, while simultaneously exerting a corrosive pressure on the Shikanmaku. At the current rate of decay, the barrier will fail completely in less than 24 hours. Captain Retsu Unohana of the 4th Division stepped forward, her usual gentle smile replaced by a look of profound concern. "The effects are already being felt. The healing wards in the relief station are becoming sluggish. My division members are reporting that keto-based treatments are taking twice the effort for half the effect. We are losing our ability to recover from injury." The news sent a fresh wave of horror through the assembled Shinigami. This wasn't just a siege. It was a poison, weakening them from the inside out. "We must strike now," Captain Soifin of the 2nd Division snapped, her small frame radiating aggressive intensity. Concentrated assault on one of the pillars. We can overwhelm it with sheer force before the barrier collapses completely. "And what if that's what they expect?" Shunsui Kyoraku countered, his voice losing its lazy drawl, replaced by a sharp, strategic edge. "They've shown us they're methodical. The Herald was a probe. This is the main attack. Rushing in blind to attack a single, obvious target is the definition of a trap." The captains began to argue, their voices rising in a cacophony of desperation and strategic disagreement. Yamamoto listened, his eyes closed, his knuckles white where he gripped his cane. It was Naruto who silenced them. He simply cleared his throat, a quiet, unassuming sound, yet it cut through the din. All eyes turned to him. He had been silent since his arrival, observing, listening, processing. "Captain Kyoraku is correct," Naruto said, his voice calm and level, drawing the focus of the entire room. "This is a trap. The enemy has been 3 steps ahead of us since the beginning. They knew our standard tactics, they knew our power sets. They are counting on us to throw our strongest fighters into a meat grinder, to waste our strength against a fortified positi. On while the field continues to drain us." He stepped forward, his gaze sweeping over the other captains. "A single, full-force assault is tactically unsound. It risks too much and leaves the rest of the Seraite vulnerable. We don't know what defenses the pillars have, or if destroying one will simply strengthen the others." "Then what do you propose, Uzumaki?" Soifin challenged. "That we sit here and wait for our powers to fade away?" "No," Naruto replied, his voice hardening. "We do not wait. We adapt. We use their own strategy against them. They are methodical, so we must be precise. They expect a sledgehammer, so we will give them 4 scalpels." He looked directly at Yamamoto. "I propose a simultaneous, multi-pronged reconnaissance in force. 4 elite squads, 1 for each pillar. Small, fast, and versatile. Our objectives are not to destroy the pillars, not yet. Our objectives are to probe their defenses, gather intelligence on the enemy's numbers and types, and if possible, identify a structural weakness in the pillar's energy source. We strike at the same time, forcing them to divide their attention. We gather the data, and then we pull back to formulate a final, coordinated strike. We fight smart, not just hard." The room fell silent. The logic was undeniable. It was a cautious plan, but it was also bold, requiring immense coordination and trust. It was a strategy at minimized risk while maximizing intelligence gathering in a situation where they were almost completely blind. Yamamoto opened his eyes, the fire within them burning with a calculating light. He looked at Naruto, a long, appraising stare. He saw not just a powerful warrior, but a true commander. "A sound strategy," the head captain rumbled. "It is decided." He pointed his cane at the map of the Seraite that was projected in the center of the room. "The pillars are at the north, south, east, and west cardinal points, in the outer districts. Captain Komamura and Captain Hitsugaya, you will lead the northern assault team. Captain Kuchiki and Captain Soifun, you will take the east. Captain Kyoraku and Captain Yukitake, the south. He paused, his gaze falling on Naruto. Captain Uzumaki, you have proposed this strategy. You will lead the Western assault team. It is the direction from which the first herald attacked. Expect the heaviest resistance. Understood, Naruto said with a nod. These are small teams, Yamamoto continued. Choose your support wisely. Naruto's gaze swept the room. His 9th division was disciplined but lacked the sheer offensive power needed for a spearhead. He needed something more. His eyes met Kensai's across the room. A silent question passed between them. Kensai gave a sharp, almost imperceptible nod. He was in. Then, a clear voice cut through the room. I'm going with him. All eyes turned to Mashiro. She had stepped forward from behind Kensai, her arms crossed, her expression one of absolute, unshakable resolve. She was looking at Naruto, her declaration not made to Yamamoto or Kensai, but to him. Kensai sighed, but there was a hint of pride in his eyes. He looked at Yamamoto. Head captain, my lieutenant's abilities proved effective against the herald's nature. She would be a valuable asset to the Western team. Yamamoto looked from Mashiro's determined face to Naruto's calm one. Captain Uzumaki, do you accept this addition to your team? I do, Naruto said, his voice leaving no room for argument. Her abilities are essential. The words sent another jolt through Mashiro. Essential. He didn't just see her as a chaotic tag along. He saw her as a critical piece of the puzzle. It is settled then, Yamamoto declared. The teams will mobilize in 30 minutes. Go. The fate of the Soul Society rests on your blades. The captains dispersed, the hall emptying in a rush of hurried orders and preparations. As his division members rushed to assemble, Naruto found himself standing for a moment in a quiet corridor with Mashiro. The frantic energy of the last hour had subsided, replaced by the quiet, heavy anticipation of the battle to come. You didn't have to volunteer, Naruto said, his voice softer than it had been in the hall. Yes, I did, she countered. Her gaze steady, she wasn't bouncing, wasn't fidgeting. A new, powerful calm had settled over her, a product of her newfound focus. You said my purpose was to find a purpose for my power. She took a step closer, her voice dropping so only he could hear. I found one. It's fighting next to you. It's making sure you have someone to watch your back. That's the riverbed you told me to build. Naruto was silent. He looked at her, at the fierce loyalty burning in her eyes, a loyalty she had given him not because of his rank, but because of his actions. He had defended her, mentored her, respected her. And in return, she was offering him this. Her power, her purpose, her unwavering resolve. It was a bond forged in combat and tempered by mutual respect, and it was stronger than any formal chain of command. This will be more dangerous than the Herald, he said, his voice a low warning. We will be deep in enemy territory, with limited support. There will be no room for error. I know, she said, her expression unwavering. I won't let you down. He reached out, his hand hovering for a moment before he placed it on her shoulder. His grip was firm, grounding. I know you won't, he said. And in that simple statement, he conveyed a depth of trust he had rarely, if ever, given to another person. The moment was broken by the arrival of Hisagi and the Saint of the assault team, the elite of the 9th Division, grim-faced and ready, along with Kensai and his own small squad of Vizard loyalists, including the hulking Hashigan Ushoda. The Western assault team was assembled. A fusion of Shinigami discipline and Vizard ferocity. Naruto dropped his hand from Mashiro's shoulder and turned to face them, his entire demeanor shifting into that of the commander. His blue eyes were like chips of ice, sharp and focused. Our destination is the Western Pillar in Rukongai District 78, the Forest of Forgotten Souls, he announced, his voice ringing with authority. The enemy is unknown. Their numbers are unknown. Their abilities are unknown. All we know is that they are hostile and they are efficient. We move fast, we strike hard, and we watch each other's backs. Our primary goal is intelligence. Do not get bogged down in prolonged fights. We identify the source of the pillar, and we get out. Am I clear? A chorus of, yes, Captain, echoed in the corridor. Naruto turned his gaze to the west, toward the unseen pillar that was poisoning the sky. A grim determination settled on his face. He glanced sideways at Mashiro, who stood ready at his side, her own face a mask of fierce resolve. They had found their purpose. Now, it was time to put it to the test. Let's move out. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Forest of Forgotten Souls. The journey to Kongde District 78 was a descent into a dying world. With every district they crossed, the air grew heavier, the oppressive weight of the entropic field pressing down on their souls. The sky was a permanent, bruised twilight, and the very reishi in the atmosphere felt thin and brittle, like old paper. A standard Shinigami would find their Shunpo growing sluggish, their Kido spells sputtering, but the Vizards on the team seemed less affected. Their internal power source, that chaotic wellspring of hollow energy, provided a buffer against the external drain, a fact that did not go unnoticed by Naruto. District 78 had once been a sprawling, sparsely populated area known for its ancient, gnarled forest. It was now aptly named the Forest of Forgotten Souls. As the assault team passed its borders, a collective shiver went through the disciplined 9th Division members. The trees were no longer simply old, they were corrupted. Their bark was the color of dried blood and flaking rust, and our branches clawed at the sickly sky like the hands of drowning men. There were no birds, no insects, no signs of life. The only sound was a low, constant hum that seemed to emanate from the very soil. A sound that vibrated in their bones and set their teeth on edge. Stay sharp. Naruto's voice cut through the unnatural quiet, his words clipped and precise. This entire forest is saturated with the enemy's energy. Treat everything as hostile. Hisagi, have your men maintain a diamond formation. Hachi, you're our center. Your barriers are our only reliable defense. Kensai, you and your squad take the vanguard with me. Mashiro, you're my shadow. Stay within 5 meters of me at all times. Do not engage unless I give the signal. The orders were clear, logical, and left no room for debate. The team moved forward, a tight, professional unit of grim-faced warriors venturing into the heart of the decay. They moved with a practiced silence, their feet barely disturbing the rust-colored leaves that carpeted the forest floor. Mashiro was a coiled spring of potential energy at Naruto's side. The usual manic energy was gone, banked like a fire, channeled into a state of hyper-awareness. She could feel the forest watching them. The branches seemed to twist to follow their movements, and the shadows between the trees were too deep, too hungry. She kept her eyes locked on Naruto's back, her senses fanned out. Tasting the corrupted air, for the first time, she was fighting not just with her power, but with a sharpened instinct that was a direct result of her new focus. They were a mile deep when it happened. Hisagi, at the rear of the formation, suddenly called out, "Halt!" The team froze. "What is it, Lieutenant?" Naruto asked, his voice low. "The ground," Hisagi said, his eyes narrowed. "Look at our tracks." They all looked back. The footprints they had left in the rust-colored leaves were gone. Not faded, not covered. Simply, gone. The leaves had silently, smoothly rearranged themselves, erasing any sign of their passage. "They're hunting us," Kensai growled, his hand tightening on the hilt of his Zanpakuto. "Hachi," Naruto said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. 30-second barrier. Now. Hashigan Ushoda, the large, gentle Vizard, nodded. He clapped his hands together, and a complex series of orange, glowing lines shot out, forming a massive, transparent cube of Kido around the entire team. "Kekai. Hashigio Sogai," he intoned. The moment the barrier solidified, the forest attacked. The ground beneath them erupted. Dozens of lean, wiry figures, twice the height of a man and built like starving wolves, burst from the soil. They were the rust stalkers. Their bodies were a darker, more compacted version of the corroded, their limbs ending in long, scythe-like claws. They moved with a terrifying, silent speed, their featureless faces turning toward the barrier. They didn't charge mindlessly. They flowed around the Kido cube, their claws scraping against its surface, testing its integrity. The familiar, corrosive effect began immediately, the orange light of Hachi's barrier fizzing and turning brown where the creatures touched it. "They're faster and smarter than the others," Kensai observed grimly from the front line. "They're ambush predators," Naruto corrected, his eyes tracking the fluid movements of the stalkers. "They were tracking us from below, waiting for the right moment to strike. The forest itself is their camouflage." His gaze flickered to Hachi. How long, Hachi? The barrier is strong, but their corrosive ability is potent, the big Vizard replied. Sweat beading on his brow. Maybe 2 minutes before they breach it. That's more than enough time, Naruto said. His eyes scanned the pack of circling stalkers, his mind processing their movements, their numbers, their patterns. He saw it almost immediately. One of the stalkers was slightly larger than the others. It didn't probe the barrier itself. It hung back, its head tilted as if it were observing, directing the others with some silent form of communication. The Alpha, Hisagi, 9th Division, Defensive Pattern Delta, Naruto commanded. Protect Hachi at all costs. Kensai, you and I will break their formation. Take the left flank. Mashiro. He paused, and in that split second, their eyes met. A universe of tactical understanding passed between them. She knew exactly what he wanted. You know your target. On your command, Captain. Hachi called out, his hands pressed against the inner wall of his barrier. Dropping the front wall, the forward-facing side of the Kido cube dissolved. In that instant, Kensai and Naruto exploded out of the opening. Blow it away, Tachikas. Kensai roared, his Zanpakuto releasing into its combat knife form. He didn't wait for his Bankai. He became a whirlwind of brute force, his blade carving arcs of white, compressed air that slammed into the stalkers, sending them flying. He was a brawler, a pure, frontline combatant. And his job was to create as much chaos as possible. Naruto moved on the opposite flank. He was a study in deadly efficiency. He still hadn't drawn his blade. His movements were a blur of shunpo, each step precise, each strike debilitating. He didn't kill the stalkers he engaged. A sharp chop to a limb joint, a palm strike to their center of mass to destabilize them. He was a surgeon, dismantling the enemy's offensive capabilities, hurting them, forcing them into a disorganized clump with Kensai's relentless assault. The Alpha Stalker, seeing its pack being thrown into disarray, finally moved. It let out a silent, psychic screech and lunged, not at Kensai or Naruto, but at the opening in the barrier, aiming for the vulnerable Kido user at the center. But Naruto had anticipated this. As the Alpha shot past him, he pivoted, his hand shooting out. Bakudo number 4, Hanawa. A rope of yellow energy coiled out and wrapped around the Alpha's ankle. It wasn't meant to hold it, just to check its momentum for a fraction of a second. It was all the time Mashiro needed. She shot out of the barrier like a cannonball, a focused, green projectile. She ignored the lesser stalkers, her eyes locked on the target Naruto had served up for her. The Alpha twisted, its claws lashing out to intercept her. She didn't dodge. She spun in midair, a maneuver of impossible agility, letting the claws whistle past her head. Her body was a blur of motion as she funneled all her power into a single point. Gotcha, she yelled, her voice a triumphant cry. Her heel, glowing with that focused, green-black energy, slammed directly into the side of the Alpha Stalker's head. The needle point strike did not create an explosion. It was a focused detonation. The Stalker's head simply ceased to exist, its body pinwheeling through the air before crumbling into a shower of rust-colored dust. The moment their leader was destroyed, the remaining stalkers froze. Their aggression vanished, replaced by a primal confusion. Kensai and Naruto did not give them a chance to recover. In a brutal, synchronized assault, they tore through the disorganized pack, shattering the remaining creatures in a matter of seconds. The clearing fell silent once more. The only sound the heavy breathing of the Shinigami. The ground was littered with piles of brown dust that were already being reabsorbed into the corrupted soil. Report, Naruto said, his breathing perfectly even, his eyes already scanning the dark treeline. No casualties, Hisagi called out from the barrier. Minor drain on Hachi's reserves. Kensai walked over, wiping a smear of dust from his face. Not bad, Naruto. You make a pretty good sheepdog. And you make a good battering ram, Kensai, Naruto replied, a hint of dry humor in his tone. He turned to Mashiro, who was bouncing on her feet again, the adrenaline of the fight coursing through her. The look he gave her was one of pure, unadulterated approval. Perfect execution, Mashiro, she beamed, her grin wide enough to split her face. See, I told you I could do discipline. The fight's not over, Naruto reminded her, though the praise lingered in the air between them. That was just the welcome party. The pillar is close. I can feel it. Let's move. The team reformed, their confidence bolstered, their synergy proven. They pushed deeper into the malevolent forest, ready for whatever lay ahead. They found the source of the hum in a vast, circular clearing. The trees here were petrified, turned into jagged spires of what looked like rusted iron. The ground was bare, cracked earth, and in the very center, the western pillar stood. It was not just light. It was a semi-translucent, crystalline structure of swirling, rust-colored energy, 100 meters tall, a tornado of decay frozen in time. The air around it was so thick with entropic energy that it was visible, a shimmering, brown haze. At the base of the pillar, hovering just above the ground, was a pulsating, crystalline object the size of a man's heart. The rusted heart, the Pilar's power source, and standing before it, as if in silent communion, was a single figure. It was humanoid, tall and unnaturally slender, N.D. seemed to be crafted from a material that looked like polished, dark red terracotta. It wore a high-collared, form-fitting robe of the same material, giving it the appearance of an ancient, funerary statue. Unlike the other creatures, it had a face. The features were elegant and androgynous, with high cheekbones and a serene, almost beatific smile. Its eyes were closed. This was the curator. As the team stepped into the clearing, the curator's eyes opened. They were hollow sockets, but from their depths, the same rust-colored light of the pillar glowed with a soft, intelligent luminescence. It turned its head, its movements slow and deliberate, and its serene smile widened. Ah! A voice echoed, not from the figure's mouth, but in their minds, smooth and melodic, like the chiming of cracked bells. The anomaly. The perfect, little paradox. And you have brought guests. How thoughtful. Who are you? Naruto demanded, his hand moving to rest on the hilt of his sword. The team spread out, forming a wide semicircle, their weapons drawn. I am merely a curator, the voice chimed. I tend the garden. I help the world forget its tired, cluttered existence and embrace the beautiful, final simplicity of dust. The curator gestured to the pillar. This is a bloom, the first of many that will help the soul society forget. Your garden is killing thousands of innocent souls, Kensai snarled, taking a step forward. Innocence is a temporary state. Existence is a flaw. We offer the cure, the curator replied, its tone maddeningly calm. You cling so desperately to your cycles of life and death, your struggles, your emotions. It is all so noisy. We offer silence. The great unmaking is not an act of destruction. It is an act of purification. Naruto's eyes narrowed. This was no mindless beast. This was a zealot, a priest of entropy. This unmaking ends now, he stated. The curator's smile did not falter. It looked directly at Naruto, its glowing eyes seeming to pierce through his flesh. To see the churning vortex of Shinigami and hollow within him. You, of all of them, should understand, it whispered in his mind. You are a confluence of opposing, pointless energies. A screeching dissonance in the symphony of the cosmos. Imagine the peace, the quiet, when both sides of you are finally, truly silent. We can offer you that peace. The offer was insidious, a poiso. Ned arrow aimed at the very core of Naruto's being, at the constant, lifelong struggle for control that defined him. For a split second, a flicker of that ancient, internal battle wavered. Then Mashiro, standing beside him, spoke up, her voice cutting through the tension. Hey, pottery face, the only thing that's gonna be silent is you, after I kick your head into a million pieces. The curator's serene expression faltered for a fraction of a second, a flicker of annoyance crossing its features. The spell was broken. Naruto's resolve hardened like steel. You heard her, Naruto said, his voice cold as ice. The negotiations are over. The curator let out a soft, sighing sound, a sound of disappointment. A pity. I had so hoped the anomaly would be reasonable. It raised a slender, terracotta hand. Then the lesson must be taught. The forest itself came alive. The petrified, iron-like trees bent and twisted, their branches sharpening into vicious spears that shot toward the team. The cracked earth split open, and grasping. Skeletal hands made of compacted rust reached for their ankles. Hachi! Naruto yelled. A massive, golden barrier, a kekai of incredible power, erupted around the team, deflecting the first wave of spears. But the rusted hands began to crawl up its sides, their corrosive touch causing the golden light to sputter and decay. Bankai! Kensai roared, not wasting a second. Tekken Tachikas. His body was engulfed in a vortex of wind and ryutsu. When it cleared, his arms were covered in segmented, blade-like armor from his knuckles to his shoulders, and a circular, serrated blade hovered behind his back like a halo. He shot forward, a living cyclone of destructive force, punching the ground and sending a shockwave of energy that shattered the grasping hands. Go! Kensai bellowed, holding the line against the regenerating hands and the forest of spears. Take down that statue. We'll hold them off. Naruto didn't hesitate. He gave a sharp nod. Hisagi, support Kensai. Mashiro, with me. He and Mashiro burst through the front of Hachi's barrier, two streaks of orange and green, heading directly for the curator. The curator watched them come, its serene smile returning. It made no move to defend itself. Instead, it tapped a single, elegant finger on the ground. A wall of rusted iron, pulled from the petrified trees, erupted from the earth, blocking their path. Naruto slid to a halt. But Mashiro, with a yell of exertion, launched herself into the air, using the wall as a ramp. I'll go over, she shouted. It's a trap, Naruto called out, but it was too late. As Mashiro reached the apex of her jump, the curator gestured again. The air above the wall solidified, turning into a thick, rust-colored haze that clung to her, slowing her, draining her momentum. She was caught, suspended in midair, a fly in a sticky, entropic web. Such vibrant, chaotic energy, the curator's voice chimed. It will make a fine offering. It raised its hand, and a spear of dark red terracotta formed, aimed at the helpless Mashiro. Naruto's ryutsu exploded. The calm, controlled ocean became a raging tsunami. He didn't shout. He didn't announce his transformation. He simply reached up and swiped his hand across his face. A mask of hard, white bone materialized, jagged black markings spreading from the right side. It was shaped like a fox's snarling visage, with elongated ears and vicious red fangs. His eyes, visible through the sockets, glowed with a malevolent, crimson light. The power that rolled off him was immense, a terrifying fusion of a Ca. Tane's ryutsu and a Vasto Lord's spiritual pressure. He drew Kyubi. The simple katana was instantly engulfed in a swirling shroud of black and red energy. He held the blade in a two-handed grip. Getsuga, he began, the dual-toned, echoing voice of his masked form a terrifying sound. The curator, sensing the immense power gathering, hesitated, its attention torn between the trapped Mashiro and the transformed Naruto. It was the opening she needed. Mashiro, trapped in the entropic web, grit her teeth. She couldn't kick, she couldn't move, but Naruto's words echoed in her head. Control is a lens. Tell the water where to go. She couldn't use her legs, so she used her voice. She took a deep, shuddering breath, pulling all her Vizard energy, all her rage and desperation, not into her limbs, but into her lungs. The air she inhaled was thick with the enemy's power. She didn't fight it, she consumed it, filtered it through her own chaotic nature, and focused it. The familiar bug-like mask formed over her face, and she opened her mouth. Sero. It was not the refined, focused beam of an espada. It was a raw, visceral, uncontrolled blast of pure, green-black power. A shotgun blast of Vizard energy that erupted from her mouth, tearing through the entropic web that held her and slamming into the curator's hastily raised defense. The terracotta shield cracked under the assault. The curator was thrown back, its serene smile finally replaced by a look of shock. Naruto didn't waste the opportunity Mashiro had created. He redirected his own attack. He wasn't aiming for the curator anymore. He was aiming for the rusted heart at the base of the pillar. The primary objective, Tensho. He brought Kyubi down, not releasing a wave of energy, but a condensed, razor-thin arc of pure, nihilistic power. A fusion of Shinigami technique and hollow destructive force. It was black as the void, outlined in blood red, and it cut through the air with a sound like tearing silk. The curator, still off balance from Mashiro's Sero, could only watch in horror as the attack bypassed it completely and struck the Pilar's power source. The black and red Getsuga Tensho hit the rusted heart. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a high-pitched scream of tortured energy filled the clearing. The crystal heart cracked, and the colossal pillar of light above it flickered violently. The oppressive, draining aura lessened for a moment, and the grasping hands and spear trees faltered. The curator let out a genuine, psychic shriek of pain, as if the blow had struck its own body. It clutched its chest, the light in its eyes dimming. The bloom. You have wounded the bloom. You insignificant, dissonant fleck of existence. It turned its full, furious attention to Naruto. Its calm was gone, replaced by a seething, vengeful rage. The terracotta of its body began to glow, cracks forming as an immense power built within it. You will be unmade for this sacrilege. It lunged at Naruto, its slender fingers sharpened into deadly claws. Naruto met the charge, his masked face a mask of cold fury, his shrouded blade clashing with the curator's claws in a shower of red and black sparks. The real fight had just begun. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. A Symphony of Dissonance. The clang of terracotta on shrouded steel was a discordant note in the humming silence of the clearing. Naruto, his fox-like mask a stark white effigy of controlled rage, met the curator's charge head-on. The being's slender arm had morphed, the polished red material reshaping itself into a long, serrated blade that it wielded with an artist's deadly grace. Sparks of red and black energy flew as Kyuubi, wreathed in the dark power of Naruto's Bankai, parried the blow. You are so full of noise, the curator's melodic voice whispered in his mind. A venomous counterpoint to the physical clash. Two souls screaming in one body. A Shinigami's lament, a hollow's hunger. It must be so tiring. Let me give you peace. Let me give you silence. The curator was impossibly fast, its movements fluid and unpredictable. It didn't fight like a brawler or a swordsman, it fought like a dancer, each step a perfect, calculated motion. Its fair arm elongated into a whip-like tendril, lashing out at Naruto's legs while he was occupied with its blade arm. Naruto was forced to use Shunpo to evade, the tendril cracking the ground where he had just stood. The very earth crumbling into rust-colored dust at the point of impact. This was not a simple physical confrontation. The curator was attacking him on two fronts, the body and the soul. With every parry, every dodge, its voice was in his head, a constant, insidious pressure. The fox beneath the mask. I can feel its hunger, the curator purred, its serene smile a terrifying fixture on its face. It wants to be free. It wants to devour me, to devour this world. Why do you hold it back? Its instincts are pure. Its desire for consumption is a beautiful, simple truth. Embrace it. Let it consume you. It is a quicker path to the silence I offer. Naruto gritted his teeth behind his mask. The voice was a poison, seeping into the cracks of his control. He could feel Kyuubi stirring within him, a low, guttural growl that was not just in his mind, but vibrating through his very bones. The ancient being hated the curator's entropic nature, viewing it as an abhorrent perversion of the natural cycle of life, death, and consumption. It wanted to be unleashed, to answer this creature's philosophy of unmaking, with its own absolute principle of devouring. Let me out, Kit, the fox's voice rumbled, a deep, primal bass line beneath the curator's chiming melody. Let me show this porcelain doll what true consumption looks like. Silence, Naruto growled, the words spoken aloud, a command to both the enemy without and the beast within. He pushed back, his Vizard power flaring. He channeled a Getsuga Tensho, not as a wave, but as a concentrated burst of energy that wrapped around Kyuubi's blade, turning it into a chaotic vortex of black and red. He swung, and the curator was forced to meet the blow with both of its reformed arms, a deep groan echoing as the terracotta cracked under the sheer, brutal force. The creature was thrown back, sliding across the corrupted earth, its serene smile finally wiped from its face, replaced by a look of clinical surprise. Such dissonance, it chimed, its mental voice laced with something akin to fascination. You use the hollow's rage to fuel the Shinigami's technique. A symphony of contradiction. You are a fascinating, flawed masterpiece, Naruto Uzumaki. It will be a true pleasure to erase you. The curator raised its hands, and the entire clearing responded to its will. The petrified iron trees shuddered, and a hail of rust iron spears, far more numerous and faster than before, rained down from all directions. The ground churned, and a dozen new rust stalkers, larger and more heavily built than the last, clawed their way to the surface, their blank faces turning towards the ongoing battle at the edge of the clearing. The pressure on Kensai's team had just increased tenfold. Damn it, Kensai roared, his bladed gauntlets a blur as he shattered a volley of spears. This thing's a one-man army. Captain Mugaruma, our flank is being overrun. A 9th Division member shouted, his blade sparking as he parried the claws of a massive stalker. The very edge of his Zanpakuto was showing the first telltale signs of corrosion. Hachi's barrier was the only thing keeping them from being completely overwhelmed, but it was flickering violently. Great patches of its golden light turning a sickening brown. I cannot maintain the Kekai and fend off this many attackers. He called out, his voice strained with effort. My Kido is being unraveled as fast as I can cast it. They were being bled dry, pinned down by an endless, regenerating army while their leader fought the conductor of it all. It was a classic, brutally effective strategy. Mashiro, having recovered from her sorrow, watched the two battles with wide, frantic eyes. She saw Kensai and the others being slowly, inexorably ground down. And she saw Naruto, a terrifying, powerful figure in his Vizard mask, locked in a deadly ballet with the curator, a fight that was as much about will as it was about power. She could feel the pressure the curator was exerting, could almost hear the insidious whispers that were battering against Naruto's control. She saw the slight tremor in his sword arm, the way the black-red energy around his blade flared with a wildness that wasn't entirely his own. He was fighting a war on 3 fronts, against the curator, against the draining aura of the pillar, and against the raging beast in his own soul. And she could see, with a terrifying clarity, that he was losing, not the physical fight, but the internal one. The one that truly mattered. She couldn't just charge in. The curator was too powerful, too aware. She would be neutralized just as she had been before. She needed a new angle. She needed a purpose. Tell the water where to go. Her eyes darted from Naruto to the curator, then to the massive, flickering pillar behind it. The source. The rusted heart at its base was still cracked, still bleeding entropic energy from the wound Naruto's attack had left. The curator was a formidable opponent, but its primary purpose wasn't to fight. It was to protect the bloom. Its attention was divided. A wild, chaotic, and utterly Mashiro-like plan formed in her mind. It was reckless. It was insane. It was perfect. She didn't announce her intentions. She didn't shout a battle cry. She just moved. She poured every ounce of her remaining energy into her legs, not for a focused strike, but for pure, unadulterated speed. She shot to the left, a green blur circling the edge of the clearing, using the chaos of Kensai's battle as a screen. The curator, locked in combat with Naruto, registered her movement. A foolish distraction. Its voice chimed in Naruto's mind. Your chaotic little friend will only die tired. But Mashiro wasn't attacking. She was running, her speed building with every step, her sonito carrying her in a wide, sweeping arc. She ran past the main battle, past the struggling Shinigami, and headed directly for the petrified forest at the far side of the clearing. What is she doing? Hisagi grunted, parrying a stalker's claw. Naruto didn't know, but he felt a sudden, inexplicable surge of trust. Whatever her plan was, he had to give her the time to execute it. He pressed his attack, his movements becoming more ferocious, more demanding, forcing the curator to focus all its attention back on him. The Getsuga around his blade roared, the fox's influence growing stronger. Mashiro reached the edge of the clearing and, without slowing, ran straight up the trunk of one of the massive, rust-iron trees. She went up 50, 70, 100 feet, defying gravity, before she kicked off, launching herself high into the air. A tiny green speck against the sickly brown sky. She was now directly above the center of the clearing, high above the pillar itself. Pointless acrobatics, the curator noted, its blade locking with Naruto's. Then Mashiro began to fall. She wasn't diving. She was plummeting, headfirst, like a stone. And as she fell, she began to spin. Faster and faster, she became a human drill, a living tornado. Her Vizard mask materialized on her face, and all her spiritual pressure, all her chaotic, explosive energy, was pulled into the spin, creating a swirling vortex of green and black around her. She wasn't aiming for the curator. She was aiming for the wounded heart of the pillar. The curator finally understood her intent. Its serene expression shattered, replaced by one of genuine alarm. No, the bloom. It tried to disengage, to intercept her, but Naruto was suddenly a wall of implacable fury. He refused to give ground. his blade a torrent of black and red, his attacks relentless. Pinning the curator in place. Your fight, his distorted voice roared, is with me. Forced to choose, the curator made a desperate move. It drove both its arms, now morphed into sharp spikes, into the ground. Rise, it commanded. The entire clearing seemed to obey. The rusted heart at the base of the pillar was suddenly encased in a thick, multi-layered dome of petrified iron and compacted rust, a desperate, last-ditch defense. But Mashiro's attack wasn't just a physical strike. It was a paradox. It was chaos given form and direction. Mashiro's cyclone crasher. She screamed, her voice a distorted roar from behind her mask. She struck the dome. The impact was not a loud explosion, but a deep, resonant cruunch that shook the very foundations of the district. The outer layers of iron shattered. The inner layers of compacted rust were pulverized. Her spinning, focused attack, a technique born of pure instinct and guided by a newfound purpose, was a drill of dissonant energy that the curator's entropic power could not simply decay. It tore through the defenses, a chaotic force unmaking the unmaker. She smashed through the final layer and her spinning form made contact with the cracked, crystalline rusted heart. The universe screamed. A wave of pure, colorless energy erupted from the pillar. It was not an explosion of force, but of anti-reality. The Remainen, G-rust stalkers and grasping hands instantly dissolved into nothing. The petrified trees crumbled into fine, gray powder. Kensai's team was thrown back, Hachi's failing barrier shattering like glass. The curator was caught in the blast, its terracotta body cracking and disintegrating, its mental voice a shriek of pure agony. The symphony is broken, but it is not over. The conductor, he is listening, he will finish the. Its voice cut out as its head dissolved into dust. The pillar of light, its power source shattered, began to collapse in on itself. The rust-colored sky tore open, revealing the true, dark sky of night above. But the pillar wasn't just vanishing, it was imploding, pulling everything in the clearing toward its collapsing center with an incredible gravitational force. Naruto, his mask cracking from the feedback, saw Mashiro falling, her spin broken, her body limp and smoking, being pulled toward the vortex. Without a second's thought, he used the last of his strength. A desperate burst of shunpo that tore his muscles, and caught her in midair. Hachi, he roared, his voice raw. The big Vizard, bleeding from a cut on his forehead, his hands already glowing, nodded grimly. Jikutani, he slammed his palms together. A sphere of distorted space enveloped the entire battered and exhausted team. With a sound like ripping canvas, they vanished from the clearing an instant before it ceased to exist, collapsing into a point of absolute nothingness that then winked out, leaving behind a perfectly smooth, sterile crater of glass under the silent, watching moon. Hay reappeared 5 miles away with a sickening lurch, tumbling onto the normal, untainted soil of District 73. The oppressive hum was gone. The air was clean. The sky was black and filled with stars. The western pillar had fallen. Hachi collapsed to his knees, his reserves utterly depleted. Kensai, his bankai receding, stumbled and leaned against a tree, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The 9th Division members, battered but alive, began to check their wounds. They had won. Naruto landed on one knee, Mashiro cradled in his arms. He gently laid her down. Her mask was gone, her clothes were shredded, and she was unconscious. But she was breathing. A thin trickle of blood ran from the corner of her mouth. He reached out, his gauntleted hand trembling slightly, and gently brushed a strand of green hair from her face. His own mask crumbled away, revealing his face, etched with exhaustion. The crimson in his eyes faded back to a deep, weary blue. He looked at Mashiro's still form, and a feeling he couldn't name, a fierce, protective warmth mixed with profound gratitude and a terrifying sense of what he had almost lost, washed over him. The others gave them a wide berth, a silent, unspoken acknowledgement of the moment. Kensai watched from a distance, a complex expression on his face. He had just seen his reckless, chaotic lieutenant execute a brilliant, suicidal strategy that had saved them all. And he had seen the famously stoic and untouchable Captain Uzumaki risk everything to save her. Things had changed, irrevocably. Naruto placed 2 fingers on Mashiro's neck, feeling the steady, if weak, pulse. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He had to get her to Unohana. He looked up at the sky, at the spot where the pillar had been. 1 down. 3 to go. The curator's final, broken words echoed in his mind. The conductor, he is listening. This was just the opening act. The symphony was far from over. He carefully gathered Mashiro into his arms again, her head resting against his chest. She stirred, her eyelids fluttering. Her eyes opened, just a slit, and she looked up at him. Did we win? She mumbled, her voice barely a whisper. Naruto looked down at her. And for the first time in front of anyone, a genuine, tired, and incredibly soft smile touched his lips. We won, he said. A faint, triumphant smile touched her own lips before her eyes slid closed again. Her body finally succumbing to its absolute exhaustion. Cradling her, Naruto rose to his feet. Let's go home, he said to his battered, victorious team. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The Scars of Victory in a Conductor's Gaze. The return was a jarring, violent transition from one reality to another. One moment they were in the sterile, silent crater where a pillar of entropic energy had stood, the next. They were tumbling onto the soft, living soil of a familiar Rukongai district. The air was clean, the reishi was thick and vibrant, and the oppressive, soul-deep hum of the pillar was gone. The silence that replaced it was not one of absence, but of peace. They had done it. They had won. But the price of that victory was starkly apparent. The elite Shinigami of the 9th Division, warriors trained to perfection, were slumped against trees, checking wounds that wouldn't have been so severe if their own healing Kido wasn't sluggish and weak. Kensai Mugaruma, a captain who had survived battles against Espada, was leaning heavily against a tree, his bankai having receded to reveal arms trembling with exhaustion. Hashigan Ushoda, the master of Kekai, was on his knees, his massive form struggling just to draw breath, the final, desperate teleportation having drained him to his absolute limit. And in the center of them all stood Naruto, a pillar of grim stillness, Cradlin. Mashiro's unconscious form in his arms. His Vizard mask was gone, his bankai had been sealed, but the exhaustion was plain on his face, a deep weariness that went beyond the physical. He looked down at the woman in his arms. Her breathing shallow, her face pale beneath a layer of grime and blood. He had felt the chaotic backlash when the pillar imploded, a wave of anti-energy that had washed over her at point-blank range. Her reckless, brilliant attack had saved them, but it had nearly torn her apart from the inside out. Captain, Hisagi said, his voice rough. He had a deep gash on his arm that was sluggishly closing. We need to get the wounded to the 4th Division. Especially Lieutenant Kuna. Naruto didn't need to be told. He adjusted his grip on Mashiro, holding her more securely against his chest, and started walking. His pace measured and unwavering despite his own depletion. He moved with a singular, undeniable purpose. The rest of the battered squad fell in behind him, a silent, weary procession of victors who felt more like survivors. Their arrival at the Seraite gates sent a shockwave through the defenders. The Western assault team had returned, and the menacing yar of light that had dominated the western sky was gone. A ragged cheer went up from the guards, a sound of desperate, disbelieving hope. But the cheer died in their throats as they saw the state of the returning warriors, and the grim, determined look on Captain Uzumaki's face as he strode past them, never breaking his stride. He had no time for celebration. He walked through the stunned crowds of Shinigami, a silent, unstoppable force, his path a straight line to the sprawling compound of the 4th Division. He didn't see the looks of awe from the lower-ranked members, or the calculating glances from other officers. He saw only the path ahead, and felt only the fragile weight in his arms. He burst through the main doors of the 4th Division hospital without ceremony, his presence causing the healers to freeze in shock. Captain Retsu Unohana was there, overseeing the chaotic triage of the wounded from the ongoing skirmishes within the walls. She turned, her gentle expression hard, ending with professional focus as she saw him. Captain Uzumaki, she began. She needs help, Naruto said, his voice low and raspy. He cut off any further pleasantries. She took the full force of the Pilar's collapse. Her internal energy is in chaos. Unohana's eyes, sharp and incredibly perceptive, flickered over Mashiro's form, then back to Naruto's face. She saw the exhaustion, but she also saw something else, a raw, desperate concern that he was barely holding in check. She had known the captain of the Ninth for decades. She had never seen him look like this. This way, she said, her voice softening slightly. She led him into a private, high-level treatment room. Place her here. Naruto gently laid Mashiro on the bed, his movements careful, almost tender. He straightened up, but he did not move away. He stood by the bedside, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, a silent, intimidating sentinel. Azane Katetsu, Hana's tall and timid lieutenant, rushed in with a diagnostic kit. She hesitated, intimidated by the sheer intensity of Naruto's spiritual pressure, which, despite his exhaustion, was a palpable, protective field around the bed. Captain, Hana said gently, we cannot work if you are. I'm not leaving, Naruto stated. It was not a request. It was a fact. Hana studied him for a moment longer, then gave a single, understanding nod. She would not win this battle. Very well, but stay back. She began her work, her hands glowing with the warm, green light of Kaido. As her healing energy flowed into Mashiro, Hana's brow furrowed in concentration. Incredible, she murmured, more to herself than to anyone else. Her soul channels, the Hakusui and Sakatsu, they're not just damaged. They're shredded. It's as if she tried to force a tsunami through a garden hose. The chaotic nature of her Vizard Ryutsu is the only thing holding her soul together. A normal Shinigami would have already dissipated. Naruto's jaw tightened. He had known it was bad. He hadn't known it was that catastrophic. She had literally torn herself apart to land that one, decisive blow. The thought sent a cold, sharp pang through his chest. Can you heal her? He asked, his voice tight. It will be difficult, Hana replied, her focus absolute. Her energy is fighting my own. It perceives my Kaido as an invasive force. I can stabilize her, but the rest will depend on her own will to recover. She looked up at him. Your presence here, it may actually be helping. Your Ryutsu is a familiar anchor in the storm of her own. It gives her something to hold on to. The door slid open, and Kensai Mugaruma stepped inside. He had received a cursory healing and looked marginally better, but the exhaustion and worry were etched on his face. He saw Naruto standing vigil by the bed and stopped, a complex mix of emotions crossing his features. Naruto, he said, his voice low. He walked to the other side of the bed, looking down at Mashiro's pale face. Hana told me, she saved us all. Naruto finished, his voice quiet. She did what none of the rest of us could. The little idiot, Kensai said, the words a rough caress of affection and frustration. She always goes too far. He looked across the bed at Naruto. She trusts you. I've never seen her follow anyone's lead like that. Not even mine. We understand each other, Naruto replied simply. The nature of our power. It is a dissonance that can create a unique harmony, if you learn how to conduct it. Kensai nodded slowly. You've been good for her. You gave her a direction she's been missing for a century. He paused, his gaze sharp. Just make sure that direction doesn't get her killed. It wasn't a threat, it was a plea, a passing of a torch he wasn't even sure he was holding. I won't, Naruto said. And the words were a solemn vow. The emergency captain's meeting was reconvened an hour later. Naruto was not present. A message had been delivered to the head captain stating simply that Captain Uzumaki was overseeing a critical situation at the 4th Division and would not be attending. Yamamoto, to the shock of many, had simply nodded and accepted it. The reports from the other teams painted a grim picture. The northern team, led by Komamura and Hitsugaya, had been met with a formidable defense. A massive, golem-like creature made of rusted artillery, a siege curator, had fought them to a complete standstill. They had been unable to even approach the pillar and were forced into a tactical retreat after sustaining heavy injuries. The eastern team had fared even worse. Byakuya and Soifun, masters of speed and precision, had been confronted by a pair of curators, the twin blades of rust, who fought with a perfect, deadly synergy that had overwhelmed them. Soifun's lieutenant had been gravely wounded, and they had been forced to retreat without gathering any significant intelligence. Only the southern team, led by the wily duo of Shunsui Kyoraku and Jashiro Yukitaki, had also found success. They had not destroyed their pillar, but using a brilliant and complex strategy of feints, misdirection, and Yukataki's unique Zanpakuto ability to absorb and redirect energy. They had managed to damage their Pilar's rusted heart before being forced back by overwhelming reinforcements. The news of the Western team's complete victory was therefore met with a mixture of awe and deep-seated unease. Captain Uzumaki's team succeeded where all others struggled or failed, Byakuya Kuchiki stated, his voice cold and analytical. We must analyze their methods. Lieutenant Kuna's involvement seems to have been pivotal. Pivotal is one word for it, Mayuri Kuritsuchi cackled, appearing on a monitor from his lab. My sensors picked up the energy signature of her final attack. A raw, focused Sero. She used a Hollow's technique to shatter the enemy's core. A delightful, if vulgar, display of raw power. The words sent a chill through the more conservative captains. His victory had been won with Vizard power, wielded in a way that was undeniably Hollow-like. The fact remains that 2 of the 4 pillars are still active, and we have sustained significant casualties, Yamamoto rumbled, his voice silencing the murmurs. The enemy is adaptive and intelligent. They will know which of our tactics succeeded and which failed. They will be reinforcing the remaining pillars. Our next assault will be even more difficult. So what's our next move, old man Yama? Shunsui asked, his tone sober. We can't afford another drawn-out fight. The field is still draining us. We consolidate our forces, Yamamoto declared. We now know the objective. The rusted hearts. A full, 2-pronged assault on the remaining pillars. Every available captain and lieutenant will be deployed. He looked around the room. The tide of this war was turned in the west. We will follow that current. The methods may have been unorthodox, but victory is victory. We will use any and every weapon at our disposal. It was a grim, pragmatic declaration. The old rules were being cast aside in the face of an existential threat. The Gote 13 was going all in. In a realm of silent, impossible geometry, a being sat on a throne carved from a single, obsidian-like shard of frozen time. It had no discernible form, appearing as a humanoid silhouette of deepest black, a void in the shape of a man, from which 2 points of cold white light emanated like distant, dying stars. This was the conductor. It felt the symphony falter. A note, a beautiful, resonant chord of decay represented by the Western curator, had gone silent. A part of the grand composition had been erased. It did not feel anger. It did not feel loss. It felt curiosity. It extended a hand of pure shadow, and an image for Med in the air before it, a replay of the battle, seen not with eyes, but with an understanding of the flow of energies. It watched the Shinigami struggle. It watched the Vizards fight. It saw Kensai's rage, Hachi's order, and then its focus narrowed on 2 discordant notes. It saw Mashiro's final, chaotic attack. A screeching, atonal blast of pure, unrefined possibility. A sound that had no plaque. In its perfectly ordered symphony of entropy. It was ugly. Then it focused on Naruto. It saw the perfect, terrible fusion of Shinigami and Hollow. It saw the disciplined rage, the controlled chaos. It saw the Getsuga Tensho that wounded the bloom, an attack that was both creation and destruction, a perfect paradox. And it saw the final, desperate burst of speed to save the girl, an action driven not by logic or strategy, but by an emotion it could not compute. Dissonance, the conductor whispered, its voice the sound of a universe freezing over. A single, chaotic note that threatens the entire composition. The other curators had failed because they had tried to silence the dissonance through overwhelming order. They had tried to unmake a paradox with a simple, linear principle. It was an error in composition. A new approach was required. One could not simply erase a dissonant note. One had to understand it, isolate it, and then rewrite it, or tear it from the page completely. Symphony requires a more personal touch, the conductor decided. The 2 points of white light in its void-like face brightened. It stood, and the very fabric of its silent realm seemed to bend around its form. It had been content to conduct from a distance, to let its instruments play their part. But this intriguing, infuriating dissonance required the conductor to take the stage itself. Let us see, it whispered to the empty void, how this little paradox sings when faced with the composer. Back in the quiet of the 4th Division hospital room, hours had passed. Naruto had not moved from his spot by Mashiro's bed. He sat on a simple wooden stool, his posture straight, his eyes closed. He was not sleeping. He was meditating, his own healing processes working to mend his strained body. But his spiritual senses were a constant, unwavering shield around Mashiro. He felt the subtle shifts in her chaotic ryutsu, the slow, painful process of her soul trying to knit itself back together. He felt a slight stir, a flutter of spiritual energy that was different from the pained chaos. It was a flicker of consciousness. His eyes snapped open. Mashiro's own eyes were fluttering open. They were hazy, unfocused. But they found him. She blinked a few times, a soft groan escaping her lips. "Foxy. Captain," she mumbled, her voice a dry, cracked whisper. "I'm here," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. He leaned forward slightly. "Don't try to talk. Did KO the pillar," she said, a faint, triumphant ghost of a smile on her lips. "My cyclone thingy was cool, right? It was reckless, idiotic, and nearly got you killed," he said, his voice flat. But there was no heat in the words, only a deep, profound undercurrent of relief. "It was also the most brilliant and courageous thing I have ever seen." Her smile widened slightly. "Knew it." She tried to push herself up, but winced, a sharp pain flashing across her face. "Ow, everything hurts. You tore your soul apart, Mashiro," he said, his voice serious. "You know Hana said your will to live is the only thing holding you together." She looked at him, her gaze clearing, focusing. She saw the deep exhaustion in his eyes, the way he held himself. As if he were personally holding back the world. "You stayed." "I stayed," he confirmed. They were silent for a moment, the quiet of the room filled with a new, deeper understanding. The chaos of battle, the political maneuvering, the fear and the adrenaline, it all melted away, leaving only this. Two paradoxical souls who had found a strange, unexpected harmony. "My riverbed," she whispered, her eyes growing heavy again. "It flows next to yours now." Naruto's expression softened completely. He reached out and, for the second time, his hand found her shoulder, a gesture of profound, grounding connection. "Get some rest," he said. "We still have a war to win." "Okay," she mumbled, her consciousness starting to fade. It was in that moment of quiet vulnerability, of a victory earned and a bond solidified, that the world went wrong. It wasn't a bell. It wasn't an explosion. It was a sound. A single, pure, impossibly perfect musical note that vibrated not in the air, but in the soul. It was a note of such profound finality that for an instant, every Shinigami in the Seraite froze, their hearts stuttering in their chests. Naruto was on his feet in an instant, his hand on Kyubi. His body a shield in front of Mashiro's bed. His eyes were wide, not with fear, but with sheer, horrified disbelief. Outside the window of the 4th Division Hospital, the very fabric of space was warping. A silhouette of absolute black, a hole in the world in the shape of a man, was descending from the sky. The spiritual pressure was not immense or explosive like a captain's bankai. It was absolute. It was the pressure of a fundamental law of the universe, a crushing, silent weight that simply was. The conductor had arrived, and it was looking directly at them. Chapter 9 End.